Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku met a new transfer student with a mysterious quirk. All credits for this video go to their respective authors. So please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It all began in KK City in China with the news that a bioluminescent baby was born. After that, exceptional individuals began popping up all over the world. The cause was unclear. Time passed and the exceptional became the norm. Fantasy became reality. At present, 80% of the world's population consists of superhumans with special ability. The world is in chaos, and a profession that everyone once only dreamed about entered the spotlight. Along with the exceptional abilities came an explosion in the crime rate. While nations struggled to overhaul their legal systems, brave individuals took up the mantle of heroes straight out of the comic books, protecting the people from evildoers. With public support, some quickly acquired the right to serve as heroes in an official capacity. Depending on their performance, they have the potential to earn government pay, fame, and glory. And that was what leads several to the location that Midoriya Izuku currently found himself in. It was only the first week of school, just the third day in class, and already he was feeling the pressure. After the mock tag team battles from the day before, the whole class had a pretty good understanding of each other and their abilities, just as their teachers did. Day 3 started, though, with an announcement that none of them had been expecting. So, we have a new student joining our class today. It was the first thing Aizawa said to them after taking roll. Several of them had noticed the addition of another desk to the classroom when they had walked in, but no one had said anything. A new student, after only 2 days. Yaoyorozu asked from her desk at the back of the room. It's a foreign transfer student. She took the entrance exam at a sister facility in Italy and only just arrived in the country yesterday. Aizawa replied back idly. A knock on the door had them all focusing in on it. Of course, in a school where there wasn't really anything like mid-year transfers, it was strange and attention-catching for a student to pop into the class after the official start of the year, especially since the hero course was just 2 classes that was supposed to be comprised of only 20 students. Whoever the transfer student was, they had to be some kind of impressive bigwig to have the school changing things in order to add her to the hero course without removing anyone already there. While the students thought this over, Aizawa answered the door, sticking his head out to talk to whoever it was on the other side. There was a short conversation before Aizawa turned back to face the class. Class, meet your new classmate, Leander Howen. The girl that walked into the classroom was, indeed, eye-catching. She stood about 5.5 feet tall, making her just a little under an inch taller than Midoriya. She was thin with curves of a woman much older, and very pretty. Her waist-length hair was a pale blue, like that of frozen water, and was worn in a half-up, half-down fashion that left her chin-length bangs as the only hair around her face. Those bangs were parted to the right to hang over her right eye. Her face was slender with full lips pulled into a smile, a straight nose and wide eyes of a deep purple color. She wore the school uniform with the tie loose, the first 2 buttons undone, the skirt on the shorter side, the shirt untucked and the blazer left open, and paired it with white, thigh-high stockings, black gloves, and black boots. Eyes, though just for a moment, instantly zeroed in on her skirt from under which sprouted a feline-like, pale blue tail with a furry tip. Overall, she was pretty and, despite the tail, looked like any non-mutant type human. But it was the way in which she entered the class that made the students stare. The girl walked into the class with a natural sway to her hips. Her eyes directed straight ahead, her chin high, and her shoulders set straight. She walked like a girl who knew she was the hot gossip, her posture brimming with self-confidence, while her smiling expression suggested that she didn't notice or care, that she had all eyes glued to her. She came to a stop beside Aizawa, one hip jutting out while she grasped her bag with both hands behind her back. Leander comes to us from Rome and is new to Japan, Aizawa told them, turning to the girl at his side. Say something. It's a pleasure to meet you all. Please call me Howen, she said politely, her accent rolling some of her letters. She bowed slightly to the class and gave them all a bright smile. Very good. Now take your seat. You'll be sitting behind Todoroki, Aizawa told her. Yes, sir, Howen replied. Howen slipped between the desks, taking her seat at the very back of the classroom. As she sat, her tail curled around her waist, making sure that she didn't sit on it. Once she was seated and the class's attention had returned to Aizawa, class was started. The regular morning classes passed pretty much the same as they always did. Each teacher made it a point to call on the new student, testing to see what she knew. The girl was pretty decent, though she excelled in foreign languages, kind of fitting of someone who came from a country where today's youngsters spoke several different languages, including English. When afternoon classes rolled around and All Might took over for combat training, Howen seemed just as thrilled about being able to put on her costume as any other student would be. When she came out to join the rest of the class, all eyes became glued on her. After the debut of the R-rated hero, Midnight, whose outfit had left little to the imagination, regulations on just how much skin could be revealed by a costume had come into play. It only took one look at Helen in her costume for them all to know one fact. Helen was flirting with the line between what was acceptable and what wasn't. She came strolling out in nothing more than a strapless, bra-like top and high-rise, panty-like bottoms, both in a royal blue with a sleeveless, cropped, black hoodie worn over them. A black belt was strapped around her waist with knives, a pole of some sort, and pouches strapped to the back, and belt-like straps decorated each bicep. She had added fingerless, royal blue gloves, thigh-high silver stockings, and knee-high boots that were nothing more than straps on the sides and back. To top it off, she had covered the top half of her face with a royal blue mask. Despite the revealing nature of the outfit, she strolled out to join the rest of the class as if she had no issue with it at all, her tail swaying happily. Minda had a field day upon seeing her, his eyes going wide. In fact, all of the boys turned to look at her as she joined them. "Don't you think that's a little too little?" Helen asked, finishing Gyro's sentence for her. "Yeah," Gyro confirmed. "You know, without the hoodie, yeah. But I'm pretty comfortable in this, and it falls within the limits of the costume regulation. Not to mention that, with my quirk, it has its uses," Helen replied. Before anyone could begin to question her on what her quirk was exactly, All Might approached the class then to explain what they would be doing for the class. Helen, a grin on her face, jammed her hands into the pockets of her hoodie. "Today we will be testing your ability to think on your feet against real-life enemies in a game of capture the flag. You can go at it alone, or in teams of 2 or 3. You will have the duration of the class to capture as many of your classmates' flags as you can. You will be graded on your performance as well as how many flags you manage to capture and lose." All Might explained to them. It wasn't the most difficult objective they had been given in class, but it would be challenging, especially when they were granted the permission to use their quirks in any way they could. Helen's gears were already turning, her eyes scanning the mock city beyond them that would serve as their battlefield of sorts. Leander Chan. Helen perked up, her tail giving one idle flick, before she turned to see who had called her. Uraraka, with Midoriya behind her, approached Helen, a smile on her face. "Would you like to team up with us? Thanks for the offer, but I think I'll go at this alone. I want to be able to observe as well as participate. And that's difficult to do if I'm with a team," Helen said honestly, not the least bit concerned with announcing her intentions. She gave Uraraka and Midoriya a smile before turning back to look at the mock city. There were several high points, but also a lot of low points. Plenty of places to lie in wait and plenty of places to ambush from. She could definitely have a wide range of fun with this location as she got a feel for her classmates and their range of quirks. The thought put a smile on her face. All Might passed out the flags they would be using, which was just basically tie-on headbands of a bright red. They were allowed to tie it anywhere on the body, but they had to use a certain knot that All Might showed them for tying it, to make it easier for others to take them. Helen took hers and stared at it. Where on her body could she tie it that she would always be aware of it without having to consciously remind herself every second? Then it hit her. Helen's tail gave a happy flick, but she was pulled from her thoughts when All Might announced that he was going to give them all 10 minutes to find themselves a starting point. After those 10 minutes, the race to snag other flags would begin. He called a start to the 10-minute time limit and retreated to the observation room while they ran to find the perfect spot. Since the students had full reign to use their quirks, Recovery Girl was already waiting in the observation room. Even Izawa was there, ready to observe the students and their progress. A simple push of the button brought the many screens sprawled throughout the area to life. From one angle or another, they could see almost every student in the class. A few, though, like Toru, were really well hidden, escaping sight from their fellow classmates, as well as their teachers. Among that number of well-hidden students was Helen. The girl had already vanished among the city. All Might had already seen a bit of how the other students thought and worked, and was curious to see how Helen handled herself. When the 10 minutes ran out, students started moving. It wasn't long before some of the faster and stronger members of the class, Bakugo and Todoroki among them, started snagging other flags, adding them to a slowly growing collection around their necks. After only 10 minutes of playtime, every member of the class came out of hiding, the mock city becoming a chaotic battleground. Every member but one, Helen. No matter how many screens All Might studied, he could find no trace of Helen. Wherever the girl had hidden, she had hidden well and hadn't come out yet. That, or she had a quirk similar to Toru's, which could work to her advantage in a game like this one. Then he saw it. It was just a brief flash of blue across the screen, heading right for Minda and Sero, who were arguing and kicking up quite a racket. And then the two boys were on their faces, Helen sitting on their backs. She snatched their flags and bolted, easily bouncing from one place to another until she was on the roof. Then she was deftly jumping from roof to roof. It was as she was running away that All Might, Aizawa, and Recovery Girl finally saw where Hallen had tied her flags, reaching behind her while her eyes continued to constantly search the area around her. Hallen tied the flags she had just stolen to her tail. It's a clever idea, Recovery Girl commented. Whether her tail is a part of her quirk or not, she would always subconsciously be aware of it and anyone or anything that could cause it harm or attack it. By tying the flags to the base of her tail, she is always constantly aware of them. Not to mention that some of the other students would be hesitant on reaching for the flags when they are that close to her backside, Aizawa said. They watched the screen as Hallen dropped out of sight between two buildings. She reappeared a moment later, stealthily peeking out around a corner, her body low to the ground and her purple eyes constantly scanning the area while her tail flicked in anticipation behind her. In that moment, she managed to look like a cat that was out on a prowl. Then her eyes landed on their next target, Kirishima. A grin curled her face and, like a cat, her whole body froze on the spot, the bottom half of her body lifting just a little bit more into the air as she prepared to ambush him. Kirishima obviously didn't see her. He was scanning the area, but he, somehow, managed to overlook Hallen, which would be his undoing in this game. The moment his back was to her, Hallen's tail flicked once, and then she was rocketing forward, like a pouncing cat. Poor Kirishima went down before he even knew what hit him. A yelp of surprise left him as Hallen hit him squarely, just below the shoulder blades. The suddenly addition of her weight was enough to send his body swaying forward and off its feet. Next thing Kirishima knew, he was face first on the ground, a foot on the back of his head, keeping him in place. "Thank you," came a sing-song voice before his flag was ripped from its place around his neck. Then Hallen sprang off him, vanishing down a darkened alley between two buildings before he could react. For the most part, every time Hallen came across someone she wanted to steal a flag from, it was the same kind of attack. She would lay in wait, watching patiently for her opening, and would attack swiftly and precisely, vanishing once more before her surprised opponent had the chance to counterattack. Before the game had hit 25 minutes, Hallen had gathered a total of 4 flags, including her own. Then she came across an opponent that would be more difficult to take by surprise. Hallen, who had managed to squeeze her generous figure in a space that was about a third her size, came across Todoroki as he was walking down a back street, his eyes constantly surveying his surroundings. Hallen watched him patiently, her eyes never leaving him. As she watched him, the top half of her body sank low to the ground, her tail curling over her back as she froze in the position. It was only a brief window, not bigger than a breath, in which he turned his back to her, but Hallen took it, and took it swiftly. She exploded out from her hiding space and was already just inches behind him by the time Todoroki realized that someone was breathing down his neck. He whipped around, wide-eyed in surprise. But Hallen had already hit him, taking him off his feet. She rolled with him as he hit the ground, and quickly sprang away from him as ice sprang to life from his right hand. Another jump carried her to the nearest rooftop. Todoroki quickly got to his feet, rounding on the rooftop, but Hallen was already sprinting away, carrying 2 of his flags with her. It was in that flight that Hallen finally drew attention to herself, and it was attention she would have been better not drawing. Hallen had just jumped across a gap between 2 roofs when, out of the side of her eyes, she became alerted to a fast-approaching opponent from her right. She landed, but instead of running, her knees bent a little further and she waited a breath until a hand was reaching for her face. Then she sprang directly into the air, the strength of her legs rocketing her a good 20 feet up. Looking down, she looked into the surprised face of Bakugo. Surprise quickly turned to annoyance as he twisted to change directions. It was in that moment that Hallen reached back, pulling a blade off the back of her belt. She gave a yank, the sunlight catching on the wire attached to the end of the blade. Before she threw it, the blade burying itself deep into the side of a taller building across the street. Thinking she had screwed up or something, with a blast from his left palm, he sent himself rocketing towards her. Hallen had other plans. She gave a yank on the wire connected to the knife, and a whirling noise reached Bakugo's ears before some kind of mechanism in her belt started reeling the wire back in, yanking Hallen out of Bakugo's way and towards the building she had thrown the knife at. Hallen hit the building feet first, kicking off to swing herself up and onto the roof. Another pull of the wire and the knife came free, Hallen catching it. Bakugo wasn't giving up that easily. He had 5 flags and Hallen had 6 of the remaining 16. He had been following Todoroki up until she had attacked him and taken 2 of his flags. With those 2 missing, Todoroki had been reduced to just 1. That left 9 more somewhere in play. But, at the moment, Bakugo was sure that Hallen had the most. Hallen wasn't going to let herself be captured so easily, especially when Todoroki joined the fray, seeking to reclaim the flags she had stolen from him. Both of the boys landed on the roof with her in their pursuit of her flags. Hallen's head whipped back and forth as she, herself, took in the 2 boys now facing her. Instead of expressing concern, though, a grin curled her lips. She jumped into the air to avoid Todoroki's ice and another throw of the knife and yank of the wire, pulled her up to the next roof and out of the way of Bakugo's attack. The two boys followed her, Helen remaining crouched, her eyes intent on the two in front of her. "She's very clever," Recovery Girl remarked as they watched the screen. "She's nimble and patient, not impatient and rash like young Bakugo." All Might agreed. "But what is her quirk?" Aizawa mused. "It doesn't say in her file." All Might asked. "No, I have her results from her entrance exam, but even in that, she didn't noticeably use a quirk. Though, notes from the exam judges said that she was out of sight for most of the exam. The only time they caught sight of her was when she finally attacked." Aizawa replied. "Didn't she have official recommendations?" Recovery Girl asked. "She did." All Might asked. "Yeah, her parents were both well-known heroes in her home country, the best team the country ever saw. Not to mention, she excelled all through middle school, but she chose to take the exam, to get in under her own power rather than by the recommendations of someone else." Aizawa answered. It was a bit naive, but it was honorable as well. Aizawa could see and appreciate that. When he had read Helen's file, he had been mildly impressed and intrigued. The girl had been the top of her grade since 4th grade. Before that, her scores, rather it was academically or athletically, had been subpar at best. Whatever had changed between 3rd and 4th grade, Helen had performed a completely 180, her grades improving and her potential as a hero skyrocketing. Now, he was watching as she dodged and avoided two people with confidence in every step she took, and it seemed that she was well aware that it took hard work to make it. Now the question they all had was, what the hell was her quirk? Back out in the mock city, Helen's eyes shifted from one boy to the other, her tail flicking idly. Bakugo looked pissed off. His face was twisted in his annoyance. It was a shame, really. Helen was sure he would be a good-looking guy if he would relax and smile genuinely. At the moment, though, he was all eyes for her, a growl rumbling from his chest. Todoroki, on the other hand, was watching the both of them. He wasn't going to relax his guard around Bakugo just because the explosive teenager was focused more on Helen. Helen's eyes scanned both, her mind working through one idea after another. If she could get one to attack her, then, for a brief moment, the other would focus on him and not her. That would give her the opening she would need to avoid the attacker and escape the other. All she needed was a few seconds head start and she would be good. Now, which one could she provoke? Helen turned her focus to Bakugo. She knew his type, was aware of what she could do to set him off, and all without saying a single word to him. So, she waited until his eyes met hers. And she grinned, her tail curling playfully. Bakugo twitched, his face twisting just a bit more. With one eye fixed on him, Helen raised a hand and covered a fake yawn. It was as if she was saying that both of them were too boring to bother with. And just like that, just as she planned, Bakugo exploded, launching himself at her. He roared in fury, ticked off with just that simple gesture. But Helen miscalculated. Bakugo wasn't the only one to attack her. Just as Bakugo attacked her, so did Todoroki. Helen's eyes widened in surprise, but the grin on her face only grew. This was even better than she planned. Just as they were about to reach striking range of Helen, she jumped. She sprang easily into the air, clearing their heads as they reached her. She landed deftly on Bakugo's shoulders and used him like a diving board to spring forward, knocking him into Todoroki. The two rolled apart when they hit the ground. By the time they got their balance back and turned to look at her, Helen was already 3 streets over, vanishing over the side of a rooftop and carrying with her 2 of Bakugo's flags. In the end, when time was called, Helen came out the winner with 11 of the 21 flags tied to her tail. She stood in front of All Might as he pat her on the head with praise. Though she acted like it was nothing, the happy swaying of her tail betrayed her true feelings while waving the 11 flags in victory. The girls also sang their praises to Helen, who waved it away as if slightly embarrassed. "I saw your standoff with Bakugo and Todoroki. That was so clever, getting them to attack you so you could jump over their heads and escape with 2 of Bakugo's flags," Uraraka said. "Todoroki is the one with 2 hair colors, right?" Helen asked. "Yeah, well, to be honest, I honestly didn't think he would attack, too. I originally had a completely different plan in mind," Helen admitted. Todoroki and Bakugo turned to look at her from where they stood a little ways away from her. Helen was smiling sheepishly back at the girl, her tail curling. "Seriously, what was the original plan?" Gyro asked. "Well, I had only intended to provoke one of them into attacking. Bakugo seemed like the one with a bigger sense of pride, so I was actually only aiming to prick his pride. I didn't take Todoroki as the type to easily have his pride wounded, so it kind of surprised me. Though, honestly, he's human, so I guess it makes sense that I kind of insulted him," Helen remarked, sheepishly scratching one cheek as she smiled. "And you went the whole time without using your quirk?" Urazu asked. "All of my brothers are pro heroes and they've taught me that you can't always rely on your quirk. I've been trained in hand-to-hand combat since I was about 8 years old, so now it's second nature to just resort to that over my quirk," Helen replied. Before anyone could start asking what her quirk was, All Might dismissed the class, and the girls split off from the boys to go to their locker room to change. Helen was able to avoid all questions about her quirk after that. In the end, she was able to escape school for the day without anyone ever finding out. Over the next few days, all of Helen's teacher came to find that Helen was very good at flying under the radar. While her grades were excellent, she tended to stick to the background, letting her classmates take the limelight. As the other students got used to her presence in class, it was like the girl escaped their thoughts. Most of the time, many people forgot she was there. The girls in the class were better at pulling Helen into things. But even then, Helen usually let the others do all the talking. Of course, this drew the attention of the teachers to her, with concern that maybe she wasn't doing well in a foreign country. But Helen waved off all concerns with a bright smile and went back to whatever she was doing beforehand. With their concerns waved off, they decided to leave it be. Before long, Helen became a back-burner thought to even the teachers. Time passed that way as Helen got used to her new home. The current day found Helen walking down the road to the gate of the school. As she neared the gate, she was suddenly bombarded by press. A persistent woman got right up in her face, holding a microphone in front of her, asking her what it was like to be taught by All Might. Helen, being the daughter and little sister of big-time heroes back in Italy, already knew how to deal with people like this. It was really rather simple. She stuck a confused look on her face and, "Scusa, non parlo Japonese," leaving the press stumbling to translate her Italian. She rushed on past them and through the school gate, a grin on her face. It always worked to play the dumb foreigner with press. Apparently, though, the news that All Might had become a teacher at the school had the media in an uproar. For several days, Helen had to wade through a vexatious crowd of news reporters. After the first time, though, they picked up that she was speaking Italian, so Helen switched to her mother's native tongue, Icelandic. It got her past them once more, though she didn't know what she was going to do the following day if they were still there, because she was pretty sure that at least a few of them could speak English. But she could think about that the next day. Leaving the press to be held up at the gate, she hurried off to class. Everyone was up and talking when she walked in and slipped to her desk in the very back. Apparently there had been some kind of argument before she walked in about who knew her better, the guys or the girls. From what Helen was able to gather, the two opposing groups decided that a single question about her would decide who knew her and who didn't. The question was decided by one of the only three neutral people in the class, Midoriya. Midoriya looked to her for help, but, curious as to where this would go, Helen pretended to be completely lost in a book. Seeing that he wasn't going to get any help from her, Midoriya just went with the first question he could think of. After all, if the others really paid attention to Helen, then they could answer the question. Those who couldn't answer it didn't pay attention to her. "What color are her eyes?" Midoriya asked. Those taking part in the argument all turned to stare at him. "Oh, of course, you can't look at her." It was obvious, instantly, that the boys didn't have the slightest clue, and with Helen's face hidden behind a book, they couldn't sneak a peek anyway. Kaminari turned to Todoroki then. "Come on, man, help us out," Kaminari demanded. "Why me?" Todoroki asked. "You sit in front of her every day. If anyone should know, it should be you," Kaminari reasoned. But Todoroki had no more of an idea than they did. Just because he sat in front of Helen didn't mean he paid any attention to what color her eyes were. After all, he hardly ever turned her direction, and when he did, she was usually facing away from him or focused on a book. "Seriously, we know what color her eyes are," Mina said. "Really? Then what color?" Kirishima asked. "They're purple." All of the girls answered at once. "You're kidding," Kaminari said. "Yeah, you girls sure?" Sero asked. "One way to find out," Uraraka said before turning to Helen. "Han-chan, what color are your eyes?" "Purple," Helen answered, flipping a page in her book. Izuku leaned over, trying to peer at Helen's face. Helen turned her eyes to him, lowering her book so he could see her face. "The girls are right. They're purple," Midoriya announced. All of the boys that had been in on the whole thing groaned while the girls smiled. Helen guessed that only girls could really know girls that quickly. It made her tail curl in amusement as she watched the boys sulk off to their desks. Aizawa made his appearance then to start class. Everyone took their seats, letting him call roll. When he was done, he moved on to the first order of business. "Good work with yesterday's battle training. I've looked over your grades and evaluations." Bakugo looked up when Aizawa called his name. "I've said this before, grow up. Stop wasting your talent. You shouldn't have let Leander bait you like she did." Bakugo turned to glare on Helen, who gave him a smile in return, her tail curling behind her. This only made Bakugo click his tongue in annoyance as he turned back around and gave Aizawa a sour "got it" in reply. "Now, on to homeroom business. Sorry for the sudden announcement, but today." For a moment, most of the class tensed up as they automatically begun to pray it wasn't another of Aizawa's brutal pop quizzes. "You'll pick a class president. Such a normal school-like thing." Came the cheer. Instantly most of the class begun to scramble to have Aizawa pick them. Hallen didn't have any interest in being the class president. She was comfortable remaining in the shadows of the class, though she was well aware that she was passing up on a good chance to stand out to recruiting agencies. In normal high schools, the position of class president was just a role of mundane tasks to add onto an already busy school life, a job that very few actually wanted. At UA, however, the role was different. The class president in the hero course was the leader, seen as a person well suited for the position of top hero. A lot of agencies paid a lot of attention to class presidents over other students. Once again, not a position appealing to Hallen. She would display herself in other ways without having to have her whole class looking towards her in times of need. She just couldn't work the way she was used to, the way she wanted, if she had the whole class looking at her. Apparently, Iida didn't agree with her. Leading the many is a task of heavy responsibility. But ambition does not equate to ability, Iida said. Hallen couldn't exactly disagree with him there. This sacred office demands the trust of its constituents. If this is to be a democracy, then I put forward the motion that our true leader must be chosen by election. But Iida, we haven't known each other long enough to build any trust, Tsuyu said, turning in her seat to look at him. And everyone'll just vote for themselves, Hiroshima added. That's precisely why anyone who manages to earn multiple votes will be the best suited individual for the job, Iida replied. I agree with him. All eyes turned to Hallen in surprise, Hallen smiling back at them. Why so surprised? Come on, think about it. Do you really want someone picked that we, ourselves, don't somewhat agree upon? Not exactly a foundation to a strong and firm class, you know what I mean. Without a strong foundation, whatever is built upon it will come crashing down. He has a point, or dot at least, I think so. The others fell silent, seeing Hallen's point. Iida turned a grateful look on Hallen, thanking her for her support. Hallen replied with a wink. Will you allow this, sensei? Iida asked Aizawa. However you do it, just make it quick. Aizawa replied, already snuggling up in his sleeping roll. So they took a vote. Hallen, herself, ended up voting for someone else. If she ended up with any votes, it wasn't going to be by her own hand. Thankfully, she came out with no votes and Midoriya came out with the most, Yaoyorozu just behind him. Something that shocked Midoriya, who hadn't expected to get anyone else's votes. Bakugo wasn't happy either, but that was probably because he thought he should be class president and only had his own vote. Iida was also upset. 0 votes. I thought as much. This is the harsh reality of this sacred office, Iida said, head hung. So you voted for someone else? Yaoyorozu asked. You're the one who proposed an election. What exactly do you want, Iida? Sato asked. I voted for someone else, too, Hallen remarked, making Yaoyorozu and Sato turn to her. But why? Sato asked. Hallen simply shrugged her shoulders, feeling no need to answer that question. She was sure that, eventually, her motives for everything she did would come to life, but for now, she was going to keep it to herself. With the vote finished, Midoriya was declared their class president and Yaoyorozu was made their vice president. After the vote, they moved on with their morning classes. When lunch was called, Hallen collected her books and got to her feet. She had just grabbed her wallet from her bag and turned out to find Todoroki right behind her. Hallen blinked at him in surprise. She couldn't imagine what he could possibly want from her and had only got his name out in questioning before he leaned closer to her, tilting his head to look up at her face. Hallen leaned back away from him, unable to back away with her desk right behind her, her eyes spreading open wide in surprise. What the hey is he doing? Todoroki stared her in the eye for a moment before finally turning away, muttering lowly to himself as he headed for the door. So her eyes really are purple. Hallen blinked after him, dumbfounded for a moment. All that just because he was checking to see if the girls had been right about her eye color. Japanese boys are so strange, Hallen remarked lowly. Ha-chan. Hallen looked up as Uraraka called out to her, waving a hand over her head. Come eat with us. Sure, Hallen agreed, smile on her face. She quickly joined Uraraka, Midoriya, and Iida, the 4 of them heading for the lunchroom. Hallen, as they entered the room, was once again hit with just how many students there were at UA. She quickly grabbed lunch with her classmates, the 4 finding seats at an already half-full table. The conversation quickly turned to the class election. I'm just a little worried about whether or not I can really be class president, Midoriya said. You can, Uraraka said confidently. Worry not, Midoriya. Your grit and decisiveness in a pinch make you perfectly suited to lead us all. That's why I voted for you, Iida admitted. But didn't you want to be president too, Iida? You've got glasses and everything, Uraraka said. I really don't think glasses is a trait you should be looking at when you pick a class president, Uraraka. Hallen piped in with a small laugh, Uraraka complaining that she wanted Hallen to call her by her given name. Again, ambition and suitability are different matters. I humbly made the choice I felt was correct, Iida said, while Hallen gave in and called Uraraka by her first name. Humbly, Midoriya repeated. The way you talk. Iida, are you a rich kid? Uraraka asked. I don't like people to know, so I try to hide it, but yes, mine is a renowned hero family, and I am the second son, Iida admitted. Well, cool, Midoriya cheered. Do you know of the turbo hero, Ingenium? Iida asked. Of course, he employs 65 sidekicks at his office in Tokyo. So you're, how very informed, Iida said as Midoriya lit up. Yes, he is my brother. He leads the people with his unwavering adherence to rules and regulations. A truly beloved hero. It's my admiration for my brother that's inspired my own desire to become a hero, though I realize I'm not yet ready to lead anyone. As the superior candidate, it was right that the role should go to you, Midoriya. Iida gave Midoriya a smile, making Midoriya and Uraraka stare at him in surprise. Howlin just smiled herself, happy to see her classmate so passionate about his reason to become a hero. What about you, Ha-chan? What's your family like? Uraraka asked, turning to look at Howlin. Now that you bring it up, there is a question I was curious to know the answer to. Leander. You are Italian, right? Fully, Iida asked. For one, call me Howlin. In my country, we don't use each other's surname to address them. For two, no, I'm not fully Italian. My father is Italian, but my mother isn't. I favor my mother, who's Icelandic, in appearances, so it's why I don't have the tan complexion that most Italians have. Howlin replied. As for my family, well, it's complicated. My mother died when I was little and my father has sort of been me since. It's really just my 4 brothers and I, now. I'm sorry, I didn't know. Uraraka said. Don't sweat it, Achako. It's been a long time, so I've pretty much moved past it. Besides, my brothers are awesome and we get along well with just the 5 of us, Howlin told her, smiling brightly. But, to answer the question, I come from a family of heroes, too. My brothers, my parents, my grandparents, and even my great-grandparents are all heroes. You guys ever hear of the hero duo, Maestro Felino and Eagle Eye? I have. Their story is so romantic, Uraraka said cheerfully. They met as sidekicks and formed a company for hero teams, going into every mission together as a team. I absolutely loved the story when I heard it. I've heard of them too, Midoriya said, Iida agreeing. Yeah, well, that's my parents, Howlin admitted. Seriously, Howlin smiled sheepishly as all 3 exclaimed this at the same time, turning to look at her. She usually didn't tell others about her parents simply because most already knew about them just from their hero names. Yeah, and my brothers are Phantasma, Catmillion, Tiger Eye, and Maximum Effort, Howlin added. Seriously, they're big-time heroes, even here in Japan, Midoriya said. I know, I usually don't talk about them, though, Howlin admitted. But why not? Aren't you proud of them? Uraraka asked. Oh, don't get me wrong. I'm very proud of my brothers and my family as a whole. I come from a long line of great heroes and couldn't be prouder. In fact, my brothers, my parents, they're my idols. Someday, I'd like to be like my mother, who defended others right down to her last breath. I'm proud, really, it's just, people tend to treat me different when they know everything. Howlin replied. If I make it anywhere in this world, I want to do it on my own 2 feet, under my own effort. Not because of who or what my friends or family are, but because of who and what I am. Does that make sense? Yeah, it does, Midoriya told her, Uraraka and Iida agreeing. Howlin smiled happily. Midoriya looked from Iida to Howlin. Both of them, just like him, had someone they idolized and looked up to, someone they wanted to be like. He was thinking this when the school alarm went off, making everyone start looking around in concern. Someone came over the speakers then. Security level 3 has been broken. All students, please evacuate in an orderly fashion. What's security level 3? Iida asked. It means someone's broken into the campus grounds. Howlin replied as she got out of her chair. We've got to evacuate. That, however, was not as easily done as said. All of the students were in a panic, crowding the hall and pushing and shoving in an attempt to make it to the exit. Howlin ended up hooking her arm through Uraraka's just to keep both her and the other girl from being shoved over. That didn't stop wayward elbows from finding soft spots though. Oh, what's going on? Uraraka asked. Such a rapid response to danger. I'd expect no less from this great institution. Iida declared. Rapid response. More like rapid panicking. Howlin replied, tightening her grip on Uraraka's arm as the girl threatened to fall over. As the students continued to try to shove forward, Midoriya was caught up in the flow and went down under a wave of student feet. It took all Howlin had just to keep Uraraka and herself from doing the same. Howlin, though, almost went down when she was momentarily distracted by someone's hand finding her backside. She was able to regain her balance and shoot the student in question a displeased look. Iida, himself, ended up plastered to one of the windows. It was from there that he could see that it was the press that had managed to get into the school. And they were now hounding Present Mike and Aizawa in an attempt to get to All Might. Iida tried to tell the other students around him about this, but no one was listening. They were all too much in a panic and Ida's voice got drowned out among the chaos. Iida looked up, finding Uraraka, Howlin hanging onto her arm, reaching out for him. It was seeing Uraraka that he got an idea. Uraraka, make me float, he called out, stretching his hand out to her. It was barely, but Uraraka, with a helpful push from Howlin, was able to reach Iida, slapping his hand and making him float up into the air. With her help, he slipped into the air over the students' heads. Quickly, he scouted out a place that would draw the attentions of all students to himself. His eyes landed on the exit sign over the door. With a little boost from his engines, he flew towards the sign, landing on the sign and drawing the attention of all to him. Though, the pose he took had Howlin fighting back a grin and a laugh. Everyone, everything's fine. It's just the press. There's nothing to panic about. We're fine. This is UA. Behave in a way befitting this great institution, Iida announced. Thankfully, all students stopped pushing and shoving and Howlin and Uraraka were given a little room to breathe. Howlin knew for sure, then, that Iida would make a good hero to have around in the case of mass evacuations. He certainly knew how to draw attention to himself. Somehow, though, the whole affair led to Midoriya stepping down from his role as class president in order for Iida to take over. In the end, Howlin guessed it was a fitting role for Iida. Just, perhaps, a little too fitting. 000-0. When class was finally dismissed, Howlin stretched in her seat. She had been sitting, inactive, for far too long. She was grateful to finally be able to get up and walk around. Getting to her feet, she gathered her books. She had a few homework assignments, but those were easy enough to take care of. After that, she didn't know what she was going to do. Thankfully, deciding that was taken out of her hands. Hey, Ha-chan. Howlin looked up as the girls surrounded her desk. All 6 were looking at her with bright-eyed looks. It made Howlin raise an eyebrow in questioning. What's up? Howlin asked. We were wondering, can we come over to your place? Toru asked. My house. Howlin asked. Yeah, you don't mind, do you? Uraraka asked. Not really. In fact, it should be fun. Howlin replied casually, though her tail was flickering like crazy behind her, betraying her happiness. Good thing no one was standing behind her. With the way her tail curled up from under her skirt, her panties had to be showing. Hey, can we come, too? Kaminari asked. Kirishima and Sero behind him. Sure, everyone can come, if they want. I got enough room, Howlin told them. Even you can come, Bakugo. Bakugo clicked in tongue in annoyance as Howlin turned to him. He turned his face away from her, declaring that he didn't need to waste his time on idiots. Seeing him act all cool and tough had Howlin's tail curling in amusement. Aw, come on, Bakugo. You aren't scared of me or something, are you? She asked, purposely trying to provoke him. Just as she wanted, he whipped around, one eye twitching as his face contorted in anger. He really was too easy to mess with. It was rather hilarious to her. I ain't scared of you, you got it? He snapped. Really? Then prove it. Come on, an hour or so won't kill you, Howlin replied, unable to take anyone believing he was scared of anything. Bakugo agreed to come over, though he claimed he would leave after 10 minutes. Howlin shrugged and turned to Todoroki next. What about you, Todoroki? We can all work on our homework together, Howlin offered, giving him a bright smile. Todoroki turned to look at her. His automatic response was to say no, but seeing her smile so brightly and happily, he found himself agreeing to go. With his positive response, Howlin lit up even more. Midoriya, Iida, you coming too? Howlin asked. As seriously? Midoriya asked, turning to look at her in surprise. Of course, all of you are welcome, she told him. In the end, it turned out that all of the class followed her home. Home, for Howlin, turned out to be a 6th-floor, upscale apartment building in the more flashier part of the city. When they stood before Howlin's apartment building, it occurred to some of them that there might be too many of them to fit in a one-person apartment. When this was brought to Howlin's attention, she just grinned. Don't worry about it, okay, she said as she walked through the front doors of the apartment. A security guard sat at a desk, beyond which sat 2 elevators. Above the guard, on the wall, was the name of the apartment building. Mina laughed when she saw the name. The Howlin Palace, she asked. Howlin looked up at the name and smiled sheepishly. Yeah, my brothers have a wicked sense of humor. They insisted on changing the name of the building, Howlin replied. Silence fell over her classmates as they processed what this meant. When it finally clicked, some jaws dropped. Wait, you own this building? Several asked as one. Well, technically it's just a gift and my brothers actually own the place, but yeah. When I got into UA and it was decided that I would move here and go to school here, my brothers bought the whole building. 1, for the security, 2, so they could move me into the top-floor penthouse, and 3, as a congratulations gift for my acceptance into UA. Howlin explained, turning to head for the desk, stopping to talk with the guard. They're all with me, Miss O'Hara. So many people, miss, the man asked, looking at the others. They're my classmates. Do me a favor. Don't report to my brothers that I brought boys over. They would hop the next plane to Japan. Howlin told the guard with a bright smile. Will do, miss. My lips are sealed. The guard, Miss O'Hara, replied. Thanks, you're the best, Miss O'Hara, Howlin told him, giving him a bright smile. Of course, miss. I'll set the elevators to let you all up to the top floor. Miss O'Hara said, turning to a computer on the desk. Thanks, Hallen told him, turning to the others. We'll have to take 2 separate elevators, but they'll take you straight up. They split up into 2 groups, taking the elevators up. Apparently, someone could only access the top floor if they had a key or the guard let them up. When the doors opened on the top floor, they found themselves in a foyer outside the door to the apartment. Hallen walked over to the door, pulling a key out of her pocket. She stuck it into the keyhole, typed a password into a keypad beside the door, and unlocked the door. Inside, they were greeted with a huge, luxurious living room to their left and a modern, state-of-the-art kitchen with attached dining room to their right. Beyond that, a short hall led to the bathroom and bedroom. It looked like the kind of apartment that a rich CEO would own, with the color scheme revolving around white, black, and blue. Hallen left them standing at the door as she walked across the living room to the large, black, U-shaped couch. She dropped her bag there and turned back towards them. Come on in. Make yourselves at home, she invited. I thought this when you told us about your family at lunch, but, Ha-chan, are you rich? Uraraka asked. Technically, it's my brothers that are rich. I just reap the benefits, Hallen replied as they started looking around the apartment. I insisted on a smaller apartment, but my brothers are strangely overprotective and indulging. It's as if they've forgotten that I'm training to be a hero just like them. This is way too much for me alone. It's a nice apartment, Toru told her brightly. It is, but it's too big. Most of the time, it just feels empty to me. I'm used to having my brothers in the same house as me, so this is way too quiet and way too empty, Hallen replied, turning to look around the apartment. I wonder where Salvatore is. Who's Salvatore? Hiroshima asked. Hallen opened her mouth to answer when there was suddenly a loud yowl and hiss, followed by cursing. Everyone turned to find Bakugo fighting off an Egyptian Mao that had sprang from hiding on top of a shelf over his head. They watched as Bakugo tried to pry the spotted cat off his head, staggering across the living room, unable to see. That's Salvatore, Hallen replied, pointing. A smile curled her lips, her hands going to her hips as she watched her cat cling to Bakugo's head, its tail lashing back and forth. They all stared as Bakugo cursed and tried, without success, to pry the cat from his head. Aren't you going to help him? It is your cat, Kaminari said. Yeah, well, you know what they say. Cats are excellent judges of character. I guess Bakugo's character doesn't stand up to Salvatore's standards, Hallen replied with a grin. Despite saying that, Hallen gave a click of her tongue that had the cat dislodging itself from Bakugo's head and darting across the room and into her arms. With a purr-filled meow, the cat curled itself into her arms, stretching to rub his head against her cheek. I'll kill that damn cat, Bakugo snapped. Only if you can catch him, and believe me, that's not easily done, Hallen replied. The Egyptian mouse can reach up to 48 kilometers per hour. With a smile, she turned away and headed for the kitchen. Salvatore climbed up onto her shoulder, riding there as she walked. He looked back at Bakugo, tail curling as if he was mocking the boy, which, of course, pissed Bakugo off. Hallen left Bakugo to fume, entering the kitchen. Anyone want anything to drink? I keep a steady supply of different drinks since my brothers would clear me out when they visit if I didn't, Hallen offered. Once she had the drinks passed out, she and the others settled down in the living room. A few of them claimed spots on the couch and others on the floor, while Salvatore reclaimed his spot on a shelf over their heads, his eyes constantly watching the teenagers below. It was from her spot on the couch that Uraraka spotted a picture frame on the end table. Hey, Ha-chan, who is this? Hallen looked up as Uraraka picked up the picture frame, turning it for her to see. The picture inside showed a couple. The man was tall, modestly muscled, tanned, with dark blue hair that bordered on black. He had golden eyes with slit pupils and cat ears and a tail that matched his hair and color. He had his arm around a young woman that, aside from hair color, the lack of a tail, and the slit pupils in her eyes, looked exactly like Hallen. She had a bright smile on her face, her long hair a platinum blonde in color. Oh, that's my parents, Hallen said, a fond smile falling on her face. You look so much like your mom, Uraraka said, handing the photo to Mina and Toru to look at it. She's right, you do, Mina remarked. I know, I'm glad about that. It means I can see her every time I look in the mirror, Hallen replied. The comment had all eyes turning to Hallen, who was looking down at her homework with a somewhat distant look on her face. When did she die? Yaoyorozu asked. I was 7, Hallen replied. My parents. Every day it was like watching a pair of newlyweds. They were so in love. They were partners in everything they did. I grew up knowing that they would die for each other as much as they would for my brothers, and I in the end. That's what my mother did. Hallen gave them all a bright, if not sad, smile when all they did in response to that was stare at her. What happened? Kaminari asked. Idiot. Don't ask her that, Gyro told him, whacking him with a journal. No, it's fine. My mother was a giving soul. Despite the fact that she ultimately gave too much, I'm proud of how much she cared for others, Hallen said. My parents were a hero duo. My father was the best hero in our country, especially with my mother at his side. She made him better in every way. All the fame and glory kind of went to his head, though. He thought he would never meet an enemy that could best him. Until he did. I think I know this story, Midoriya remarked. Maestro Felino went up against the leader of a crime syndicate and was about to lose when Midoriya cut off, Helen giving him a smile when he gave her an apologetic look. She shook her head, silently telling him that it was all right. When my mother, the hero Eagle Eye, stepped in, taking the blow that was meant for my father, Helen finished. So you didn't lose your dad that day, but your mother instead, Kirishima said. Oh, no, don't misunderstand. I lost both of my parents that day, Helen told him, shaking her head. He's alive somewhere out there, my father that is, but he was never the same after my mother died. The man I knew and idolized was gone. And then, after her funeral, he simply just vanished, leaving me on my own. Helen shrugged in a what can you do kind of way. After so long, she had probably come to terms with the neglect of her father. Hearing all this drew Todoroki's full attention to her. It was a sad and awful thing, but Helen just smiled, as if the world still looked bright. She wasn't going to let the bad things cloud her bright future. But that's all water under the bridge now. My brothers and I do pretty well for ourselves. I've come to terms with the fact that he left, whatever his reasons may have been. It was a choice he made and something I have to live with. Might as well make the best of it, yeah. Helen said this with a smile on her face, and as if that was the end of the conversation, which they were sure she wanted it to be, she turned back to her homework. Taking her silent request to drop the subject, they all went back to their homework. For a moment longer than the others, Todoroki stared at Helen, watching as she leaned over to help Mina with an English question, tucking her bangs behind her ears so they wouldn't block her eyes. He didn't know a lot about Helen, but maybe it was time he found out more. Over the next few days, things calmed down and got back to normal, something Helen was grateful for. She couldn't stand any more of the press after all the fuss they had created at the school that had led to her being crammed too close to other students in the school. After having all of her classmates over to her house one day, it seemed she went home every day with, at least, one guest. Mostly it was one of the girls, company that Salvador was more than happy to receive. Helen swore that her cat was a ladies' man, more so than Minta at least. Today, though, her attention was on other matters. It was 12:50 in the afternoon and the start of their battle training classes, the part of the day that Helen looked forward to the most. Well, after English class, that is. Now for today's basic hero training, Aizawa announced. This time, All Might, myself, and one other will supervise. What are we doing, exactly? Sero asked, raising his hand into the air. Preparing you for disaster relief, from fires to floods. It's rescue training, Aizawa announced. Several of the students started muttering back and forth. Helen, herself, was excited. She couldn't wait to see how they were going to conduct this kind of training. She didn't realize that, by the end of the day, she was going to be eating her words of excitement. Hey, Aizawa called, cutting off the students. I'm not done. It's up to each of you whether or not you wear your costumes, as some of them are ill-suited to this sort of activity. At this point, Aizawa's eyes turned to Helen. What? Helen asked. Why look at me, Aizawa-sensei. Just think about it before you decide. Aizawa continued instead of answering Helen. The training site is a bit remote, so we'll be going by bus. That's all. Get ready. Despite Aizawa's less than subtle hint, Helen, like the rest of her female classmates, grabbed her costume and headed to the locker room to change. Helen had put a lot of thought into her costume when she had sent in the design notes to the support company. Revealing or not, it served a purpose and would withstand a lot, so she wasn't concerned. When the girls rejoined the boys, Uraraka and Helen found Midoriya dressed in his gym uniform. He only had the masked part of his costume on. You wore your gym clothes, Deku. Where's your costume? Uraraka asked. It didn't make it through our last battle training in one piece. Midoriya replied. Gee, I wonder why. Helen teased, her eyes going to Bakugo. What are you looking at? Bakugo snapped. Oh, nothing. Nothing at all. Helen replied, a grin curling her lips as her tail curled as well. The school's support company is repairing it. Just gotta wait for now. Midoriya continued, while, in the background, Helen teased Bakugo while he fumed. Ahead of them, at the bus, Iida was calling for them to line up according to their seating order. This put Helen behind Todoroki. Once on the bus, though, they found it wasn't a traditional-style bus. Instead, its seats, for the first half of the bus, were lined against the walls, like benches on a train, leaving the center wide open, while the second half of the bus was set up like a normal bus. Helen still decided to take the seat next to Todoroki since she had already been behind him anyway. The moment she was sitting, she pulled a book out of one of the many inside pockets in her hoodie and started to read. Darn, it was this type of bus. Iida sulked, hanging his head. All that for nothing, Mina said, patting his shoulder. Across from them, Asui was seated next to Midoriya and just started talking. I generally say what's on my mind, Midoriya. She started. Oh, what is it, Asui? Midoriya asked. Call me Suyu, Asui insisted before continuing. Your quirk resembles All Might's. Midoriya, as he always did when the subject was brought up, freaked, stumbling over his words. It made Helen glance up from her book for a moment before her eyes returned to their reading. Really? Nah, I'm Midoriya stuttered before trailing off. Hold up, Tsuyu. All Might doesn't get hurt, though, Kirishima said, unknowingly saving Midoriya. They're already different in that way, perhaps, but All Might is horribly overripped. Midoriya is as tiny as a twig compared to him, Helen remarked, not looking up from her book. A quirk like that is bound to cause damage if your body isn't properly suited for it. If Midoriya was as muscled and sturdy as All Might is, then he might not hurt himself. Or it could just all be a matter of control. You got a point, Kirishima conceded. But that sort of simple, strength-enhancing quirk is awesome. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it. Not like my hardening. I'm good in a fight, but it's real boring. Kirishima held out an arm, his skin hardening and taking on a rocky kind of appearance. It wasn't a flashy quirk, but it was one that had its uses. I think that's pretty neat, though, Midoriya said. Your quirk's more than enough if you want to go pro. But don't forget that heroes also have to worry about popular appeal. My naval laser is both strong and cool. Perfect for a pro, Aoyama said proudly. As long as you don't blow up your own stomach, Mina reminded him. The look that Aoyama gave Mina was not pleased nor pleasant. You want to talk strong and cool. That'd be Todoroki and Bakugo. Bakugo looked up when his name was said, but quickly looked away, clicking his tongue in annoyance. Beside Howlin, Todoroki, who had his eyes closed as if he was resting, didn't react in any way, just continued to rest. But Bakugo's so unhinged. He'd never be popular, Asui remarked. What do you say, frog face? Bakugo snapped, flying to his feet. See, Asui said, proving her point. We've only barely started socializing, and already you've made it abundantly clear to us the unpleasantness of your steamed turd of a personality. Kaminari told Bakugo. Yeah, okay, Mr. Vocabulary. How about I pound you? Bakugo retorted. You're only proving their points, Bakugo. Howlin remarked. No one asked you. Bakugo snapped at her. Speaking of quirks, Kirishima said, turning to look at Howlin. What's yours, Leander? All eyes turned to Howlin. Even Todoroki opened his eyes to peer at her. Howlin looked up from her book, humming and questioning before she smiled. Oh, that, she said, as if it had slipped her mind. That's on a need-to-know basis. Right now, I don't deem it necessary for anyone to know. Howlin gave them all a bright smile before turning back to her book. Groans left a few of her classmates who were dissatisfied with the answer to the question. Come on, Leander. Does anyone know what it is? Kaminari asked. Do you mean among the students, or the teaching staff too? Howlin asked. Both, Kaminari replied. Nope, I don't think anyone does. Howlin replied, shrugging. I don't really like telling anyone if I don't have to, so I doubt it's even in my school files. Makes things more interesting. Her classmates were unsure how to take that, especially when she grinned at them, her lips spreading just enough to give them a glimpse at a fang-like incisor. I bet it's just some mutant-type quirk having to do with your tail. Bakugo growled. I wonder about that. I suppose one day you might find out. Maybe, Howlin replied. She was content to leave them to think whatever they wanted. If they wanted to think it was Quirk dealing with her physical differences, then they could. If they wanted to think it was something completely unrelated to her appearance, then they could think that too. She would only reveal her quirk when she was good and ready and not a moment before. We're here. Look sharp, now, Aizawa suddenly called. The site they found themselves at when they exited the bus and entered the building was a space comprised of several different types of disaster zones. There was a zone made up of buildings on fire, another made to simulate a landslide, another for an earthquake and flood, and so on. One student made the joke that it looked like Universal Studios Japan. It was there that they met the hero, 13. Every disaster and accident you can imagine. I built this facility myself. I call it the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, 13 told them. USJ. Just like Universal Studios Japan. Funny, Howlin remarked, amused, while the students stared at their new surroundings. Taking in the different zones laid out before them, Aizawa approached 13. 13, where's All Might? I thought he was meeting us here, Aizawa said, looking around for the massive blonde. About that, Senpai. It seems he just about reached his limit during his morning commute. Howlin looked up in time to catch 13 holding up 3 fingers. As Howlin's curiosity grew, her tail gave a single, idle flick. He's resting in the break room. The height of irrationality. So be it, Aizawa said. Let's get started. Before we do, I have 1 or 2 points, 13 said. Or 3.4. Lots of points, we get it, Howlin said, smiling in amusement as she braced her hands on her hips. 13 gave a small laugh, but quickly turned serious once more. As I'm sure many of you are aware, my quirk is called Black Hole. It can suck in and tear apart anything. 13 explained. And you've used it to save people in all sorts of disasters. Midoriya piped in. Indeed. However, my power could easily kill. I've no doubt there are some among you with similar abilities. 13 said, the seriousness of the words falling over the students before 13 took a bow. That is all. I thank you for listening. The others gave 13 a round of applause. Ready to get things on the way, Aizawa, who stood at the rail overlooking the main plaza of the facility, drew attention back to himself. Great. First off, Aizawa was cut off when something down in the plaza drew his attention. Howlin, who happened to be standing near him, instantly saw what drew his attention. Down in the plaza, a small, black swirling mass began to form. From the center of the mass came a hand and then a person, and another after that, and more people after that. From the black mist came person after person. Howlin had a horrible feeling about this, and Aizawa shared her sentiment. Huddle up and don't move, he yelled. Most of the students were slow to respond, unsure of what was going on. 13. Protect the students. Some of the students still didn't get what was going on. What the heck's that? More battle robots, like during the entrance exam. Kirishima asked. Don't move. Those are villains. Aizawa yelled at them, pulling his goggles on. Before Howlin's eyes, the black mist came together, forming a humanoid shape with some kind of metal neck guard showing where a neck should be. It was this person made of mist that spoke next. 13. An eraser head, is it? According to the staff schedule I received the other day, All Might is supposed to be here, he said. Of course, that whole incident was the scum's doing, Aizawa remarked. Howlin wasn't focusing on that or the mist man. Her eyes, instead, were drawn to a man standing beside the mist man. Overall, even though she couldn't see his face, she would have placed him somewhere in his 20s, and he was covered with some kind of hands. She didn't know if they were real or not, and truth be told, she didn't want to know. All she knew was that one of those hands covered his face, keeping them all from seeing what he actually looked like, though she wasn't fond of the fact that they both had the same shade of blue hair. Where is he? We've come all this way, and brought so many playmates, he said, his head whipping back and forth as he peered past the fingers of the hand on his face. All Might. The symbol of peace. Is he here? His next words sent a chill down Howlin's spine. I wonder if some dead kids will bring him here. Howlin felt the chill claw its way down her spine and had to suppress a shiver. She had no doubt in her mind that this man meant what he said. They were there for All Might, and if they didn't get him, they would attack the students. As the seconds ticked by, more and more villains came through the black mist. There were so many, and they only had 2 pro heroes on their side. Villains? No way. What villains be dumb enough to sneak into a school for heroes? Someone asked from behind Howlin. Sensei, aren't there intruder sensors? Urarazu asked. Yes, of course there are. 13 replied. It has to be the quirk of one of those villains blocking the sensors. Howlin remarked. She's right. Are they only here, or also at the main building? Either way, Leander is right. If the sensors aren't working, it has to be one of their quirks that's doing it. Todoroki agreed. Like Aizawa-sensei said before we came here, this place is remote, and these villains obviously picked a time when there'd be few people here, aside from ourselves. Howlin remarked. They're more clever than they seem and obviously must have an objective. It's too well coordinated of an attack to be anything else. Aizawa glanced at Howlin before turning his attention back to 13. 13. Begin evacuation. And try calling the school. One of these villains must be jamming the sensors. There's a good chance one of their electric types is causing the interference. Kaminari, try using your quirk to signal for help, Aizawa ordered. Got it, Kaminari replied. But sensei, you can't fight them all alone, Midoriya insisted. Against that many. Even you can't nullify all their quirks. As Eraser Head, your fighting style involves erasure and a quick binding capture. Head-on battle isn't. No good hero is a one-trick pony, Aizawa told Midoriya, cutting him off. 13. Take care of them. With that, Aizawa jumped down the stairs and into the fight. Despite being a hero that specialized in sneak attacks, Aizawa handled himself just fine. Howlin was positive about his success at defending himself. Or, at least, she prayed that he would continue to have such success. Wow, he can hold his own even when outnumbered, Midoriya said. He wouldn't be much of a seasoned pro if he couldn't, Howlin told Midoriya, grabbing his arm to turn him to follow the others. They needed to get out of there because they would only get in the way and distract Aizawa. The mist man, Kurogiri, had other ideas, thought. As quick as lightning, he appeared in their way, blocking the door out of the USJ. I won't allow that, he said, bringing 13, Howlin, and her classmates all to a stop. Greetings, we are the League of Villains. Forgive our audacity, but today, we've come here to UA High School, this bastion of heroism. To end the life of All Might, the symbol of peace. We were under the impression that All Might would be here today. But it seems his schedule was revised. Well, and no matter, my role remains unchanged. Before anyone else could react, Bakugo and Kirishima attacked Kurogiri. Kurogiri reacted quickly, dodging the 2 attacking boys. Not if we end you first. Betcha didn't see that coming. Kirishima said. That was close. Yes, students though you may be, you are the best of the best, Kurogiri admitted. No, get back. Both of you, 13 called. Helen moved just about as fast as she could, but she wasn't fast enough to avoid what happened next, and nor were the rest of her classmates. Kurogiri's mist spread out, covering them all. Some of her classmates grabbed onto each other, trying not to get separated. Shoji reached out, trying to grab Helen, but he was a moment too slow. To Helen, it was like her world went black for just a brief moment, and in the next breath, she was falling through the air. With her balance off, Helen flailed, trying to get her balance back in order to land on her feet. Instead, she landed on something that she was sure was human. There was a grunt as, whoever it was, collapsed to the ground under her weight. Okay, that was not fun, Helen remarked, pushing herself up. When she looked up, she found herself in the last place she really should be. Leander, Aizawa-sensei. Helen looked up to find herself in the middle of the fight between Aizawa and the villains. And the person she was sitting on was one of the villains. Helen looked back and forth, her eyes flying past Aizawa and up towards the exit of the USJ, where Kurogiri was facing off with 13 and whatever students remained up there. Son of a, he teleported me, Helen retorted, displeased with her current situation. So displeased that when the man under her started to threaten her to get of him or he'd hurt her, she slammed the heel of her boot into his cheekbone to shut him up. The hit was so hard that the man was knocked unconscious. With that, she climbed off of him, dusting herself off. Hell's bells, she hissed, rubbing the base of her tail. Aizawa's eyes widened as two villains charged Helen from behind. He barely got her name out in warning before Helen whipped around, as if she had been aware of their presence the whole time. The first man was already stretching a hand out, reaching for her. She grabbed the wrist of that hand, her other hand grabbing his belt. Twisting, she knocked his ankles together, taking his feet out from under him, using his own falling momentum against him. Helen twisted and threw the man back at his comrades with an ease that spoke of practice throwing people larger than she was. Without stopping, Helen turned on her second attacker, quickly noting that the man had large, bat-like ears on the sides of his head and that his eyes were closed, as if he didn't need them to see. Taking a gamble that he used his ears to track, Helen took a deep breath in, waiting until the man was right on top of her, before she let out the most unholiest of screeches right in his face. Everyone around her, even Aizawa, was forced to cover their ears. The man with the bat ears, however, hit the ground, twitching as he covered his ears. Helen, as part of a family with a long line of mutant-type quirks, knew better than most the sensitivity that came with ears like the man. She also knew that she had a screech straight from hell. Her brothers had told her that plenty of times growing up. Her fluid and quick response managed to shock the villains around her, giving her time to backtrack until she stood next to Aizawa, her eyes never leaving those in front of her. She wasn't in the most ideal situation, but she could manage as long as she focused on self-defense. After all, from what she could tell, most of those there were 2-bit thugs, nothing more than street criminals incapable of standing up to someone well-trained. Aizawa-sensei. Aizawa's eyes flickered to Helen, taking in her serious and focused expression before returning to the villains in front of them. What is it? He asked. I can help you with some of these thugs as long as I don't use my quirk, right? That's the law here in Japan, right? Without a license I can't use my quirk against others, right? Helen asked. Outside of school? That's right, Aizawa replied. But Leander, then leave the mutant types to me. Aizawa turned wide eyes on Helen. Her expression was completely serious as her eyes scanned those villains in front of her. Not a chance. Get out of here, Aizawa ordered. Even if I was to follow your orders, Aizawa-sensei, I'm not really in a position where I can make a run for it. There are too many of them for you to cover my back, and that mist man might just send me back again. Helen reasoned. She met Aizawa's eyes as he debated it. Trust me, Aizawa-sensei. I've been trained to fight mutant types since I was little. I'm more than capable of defending myself without the use of my quirk. My family saw to that. We don't really have much of a choice, do we? Aizawa saw her point. Already, the villains had surrounded them, blocking off Helen's path of retreat. She would have to go through about 24 villains anyway, just to get back to 13. And Helen had a point. He had seen her in action in battle training. The girl was quick, clever, capable of making on-the-spot decisions and reacting quickly to a fast-approaching threat. She was among the best hand-to-hand combat specialists he had seen to date and had the observing talent of her mother as she had displayed in the short confrontation with the two that had attacked her. His choice obvious. All right, he told her. But if you see an opening, you get out of here. Yes, sir, Helen replied, taking her battle stance. Her tail flicking once in anticipation of the fight. She was nervous, a little unsure, and horribly outnumbered, but she had her teacher at her side and years of combat training under her belt. And if she was being honest, this wasn't even her first confrontation with a villain. She could do this. For the safety of her classmates, for her own safety and that of everyone on the campus, she would have to fight. As long as she kept moving, kept her focus, she should be all right. With that, she entered the fray. She could stop to think about how stupid she was in entering the fight when she was safe and sound back at the main building. 000-0. Across the USJ. At the flood zone, Midoriya came out of the black mist, falling towards the water head first. He hit the water with a splash, almost instantly being confronted by an aquatic villain that had, apparently, been laying in waiting. He attacked Midoriya with jaws of shark teeth stretched out wide. "It's nothing personal, kid, but say goodbye," the villain declared. Luckily for Midoriya, Asui showed up then, slamming her feet into the villain's head and wrapping Midoriya in her tongue to pull him and herself out of the water. It wasn't until after she had placed him on the deck of the ship floating in the zone that he realized she had Minta with her. "Thanks, Asui," Midoriya said as Asui scaled the side of the ship to pull herself up onto the deck. "Call me Tsuyu, but we seem to be in trouble here," she replied. "They know our schedule. The simplest explanation is that they caused that meteor rush the other day in order to get their intel. It's like Leander said. They've been waiting for this chance. And they prepared for it well," Midoriya said. But, there's no way they could ever kill All Might. He'll thrash him once he gets here." "Bam, how?" Minta insisted. "Minta. They must have figured out a way to kill him," Asui replied. "Otherwise, why come here just to get beaten? I wouldn't put it past them. That one guy promised to kill us too, after all. Who says we can even hold out until All Might gets here? Even when he does show up. Who says he won't be killed?" This only served to freak out Minta even more. It was made worse when they looked over the side of the deck to find that it wasn't just one villain down in the water. There were several waiting in the water. Midoriya started muttering to himself as he walked this brain through their current situation. These villains were after All Might's life. Midoriya knew there had to be a reason behind their interest in All Might and that it couldn't simply be because he was a hero that stood against villains. They would be after all heroes then. Was it because he was the symbol of peace? No, he was sure there had to be a specific reason, but he couldn't figure it out. That could wait for another time. For now, they had their lives to worry about. If there's even a chance that they have a way to beat All Might, then we have a fight to win," Midoriya declared. "How can we possibly fight, you dumbass? These guys might even be tough enough to kill All Might." "You're contradicting yourself, Midoriya. Our only hope is to hide somewhere until the UA heroes come to rescue us," Minta yelled. "Minta, those guys down there. They're clearly suited to aquatic combat, right?" Midoriya asked. "Stop ignoring my point," Minta snapped. "So the ringleaders must have recruited their team knowing about USJ's different environments," Asui said, catching on to Midoriya's point. "Exactly. Their intel told them that much, at least. But with all their careful planning, one odd point sticks out," Midoriya said. "They zapped you, Asu.errr.tsuyu into the flood zone," seeing that he had slipped up on her name once again, but had tried to catch and correct himself. She let him go on it this time. Minta, on the other hand, was impatient. "What's your point already?" he snapped. "What I'm saying is that they must not know about our quirks," Midoriya said. "If they'd known about me having frog powers, they'd have dumped me into the fiery area," Asui agreed. "It's exactly because they didn't know about our quirks that their strategy was to scatter us and overwhelm us with numbers. They've got us beat when it comes to numbers and experience, so there's only one way for us to win. Exploit the fact that they don't know our quirks," Midoriya told his friends. "Look, they're not trying to get on board. That supports my theory." Despite that being true, it also meant that the villains weren't underestimating them either. With that in mind, the three of them decided to share their quirks with each other. Asui went first. "I can jump really high and stick to walls. My tongue can stretch to a maximum of 20 meters. Also, I can spit up my stomach to clean it and secrete a poisonous fluid. I say poisonous, but it really just stings a little," Asui explained, Minta's mind getting stuck on the word secrete. "Those last two aren't that useful. Just forget about them." "Wow, you're strong. I underestimated you," Midoriya complimented her. I have super strength, but immediately after using it, it messes me up. My quirk. It's a double-edged sword." When it was Minta's turn, he reached up, plucking off one of the balls on his head. He stuck it to the wall near him to display its sticking capabilities. "It's really sticky. If I'm feeling good, it'll stick there all day. A new one'll grow in the old one's place, but if I take too many, I'll start bleeding. They'll bounce off my own body without sticking to me," Minta explained. When all Midoriya and Asui did was stare, he teared up and freaked out. "Like I said, we just gotta wait to be rescued. My quirk is terrible for fighting multiple opponents." "And not at all. It's a great quirk. We just have to think how to make use of it," Midoriya told him. All three were sent stumbling about the deck when something suddenly hit the ship, cutting it in two. "I'm getting bored over here," yelled one of the villains from the water below. "Let's finish this thing." In response, freaking out and crying, Minta started throwing his balls overboard. He then turned to Midoriya, tears streaming down his face, and pointed towards the water as if just realizing that he had given away his quirk. Midoriya, on the other hand, noticed that the villains, being on guard as they were doing their best to avoid touching Minta's balls. That boat'll go under in less than a minute. Once you're in the water, you're chum. One villain called up to them. Ah, he's right, Minta cried, backing away from the deck railing. Minta, did you really come to UA to become a hero? Asui asked. Shut up. You're crazy for not being scared. We were just freaking middle school kids a couple of months ago. I never thought we'd be in a life or death situation so soon. I just wish I could have gotten to Gropie Urazu's Buborazis before I died. Minta cried back. He was convinced that they were going to die. Midoriya, though, was searching his brain for some kind of idea, and when it came to him, he knew it was the only option left to him in their current situation. The moment when the enemy thinks they've won represents your best chance. All Might once said that during a documentary interview. Midoriya said, "What are you?" Minta trailed off when he noticed that Midoriya was trembling in fear. "This is the only way we can win," Midoriya insisted. Before the villains below could figure out what he was doing, Midoriya climbed up onto the railing and jumped, screaming, "Go to hell," at the top of his lungs. The villains below thought he was an idiot, just jumping to his death, but Midoriya had a plan. He knew that no matter how big of a smash he used, he could never hit all of the villains, and if they managed to get out of the flood zone, there were more villains between them and the exit. He couldn't go sacrificing his whole arm just yet. So, putting his middle finger and thumb together, he focused his power into those two fingers, picturing the egg not exploding in the microwave. On the ship deck, Asui grabbed Minta, preparing herself to jump when Midoriya released his smash. With the release of his finger, it was like a shock wave suddenly exploded into the water, sending the waves rocketing away from the impact zone. "Tsuyu, Minta," Midoriya yelled. Asui took her cue, jumping. She grabbed Midoriya with her tongue, pulling him after her. As they flew over the water, Minta threw more of his balls into the water below. As the water rushed back in on the impact zone, the balls began to stick to the villains, making them stick to each other until every one of the villains was stuck together in a large ball that they couldn't escape from. By delivering a strong shock to the water's surface, it spreads, and once it rushes back into the center, Midoriya trailed off as he watched the water crash back into the center, sending a pillar of water up into the air. "Looks like we beat our first challenge. Or something. Good job, you two," Asui told her two classmates. Once they landed in shallow water, Asui set Midoriya down, the two walking towards the shoreline while Asui drugged Minta by his cape. "I took a really clean dump this morning, so they should be stuck together all day," Minta remarked with a chuckle as he watched the villain float along the water, all stuck together. Lucky that managed to get them all, because honestly that was a real gamble. If they'd been smart, a few of them would have been hidden under the water's surface, but I guess they weren't thinking ahead. "Still, gotta be careful here. Stop it, Midoriya," Asui said when Midoriya started his muttering once again. "That's scary. So what should we do now?" "Right. For now, calling for help is our top priority. If possible, we should follow the shoreline and make for the exit, avoiding the plaza altogether," Midoriya suggested. Glancing across the open area between them and the central plaza, he could just make out all of the people gathered there. If possible, it looked like there were more there than before. "Right. Looks like Aizawa-sensei is drawing a large number of them to the plaza," Asui remarked. "There are too many of them. Of course he's more than holding his own out there, but it's too much for him. He knew that, but he jumped in to protect us," Midoriya remarked. "Hey, don't tell me you're that stupid, Midoriya," Minta remarked, seeing what Midoriya was getting at. "I'm not saying we should dive right into the fight, just that we watch for an opening and do what we can to lighten Sensei's load," Midoriya suggested. Though it was for the best of intentions, Midoriya, in that moment, didn't realize the grave miscalculation he had made in thinking, even for a moment, that they stood a chance against their current enemies. Back at the plaza, Aizawa was taking down one villain after another. He had, just 5 minutes prior, lost sight of Helen in the mix. While he had a bad feeling about that, he was hoping she had seen an opening and had made a break for the exit. He prayed that was what it was, because he had no way of checking. The distraction of wondering where Helen was only lasted for a moment. When the man with the hands all over him, Shigaraki, charged into the fight, he forced his focus away from Helen. The girl was clever, she could take care of herself. "So, you're the boss?" Aizawa demanded, trying to capture Shigaraki before he could reach him. When Shigaraki only grabbed the tape, Aizawa slipped past the lackey in front of him and darted towards Shigaraki. He gave a yank on the capture tape to pull Shigaraki forward and off balance, jamming an elbow into Shigaraki's gut. Shigaraki caught the elbow before it could do any damage to him. It's hard to tell when you're scampering around, but there are moments when your hair falls in front of your eyes, Shigaraki said, every time you finish a given move, and your max duration's getting shorter and shorter. Don't overdo it now, Eraserhead. Aizawa's eyes widened, pain stabbing through his arm as the skin on his elbow began to deteriorate. breaking away from his elbow in flakes, punching Shigaraki with the other hand. He retreated back from the other man, putting distance between them. Instantly, other villains were on him. Your quirk ... It's not good in long group battles? Huh. This is kinda different from your usual work. Yeah. You specialize in quick sneak attacks. Yet you jumped right into this fight, hoping to make the kids feel safe. So cool. So cool. By the way, hero. As Shigaraki said this, Aizawa became aware of a presence behind him. Turning, he found a monster-like man with his brain exposed behind him. I'm not the boss here. The next thing Aizawa knew, his face was being mashed into the ground. The monster, who Shigaraki called Nomu, easily breaking his arms despite Aizawa erasing his quirk. It was obvious that the creature, whatever it was strong without the added help of a quirk, and it was all too easy for Nomu to bash Aizawa's head into the ground. Unknown to Aizawa, Midoriya, Isui, and Minta were watching from the shoreline of the flood zone. Meet the anti-symbol of peace, the bioengineered Nomu. Shigaraki told Aizawa, introducing the creature. Canceling out quirks. Pretty cool, but nothing special. Up against crazy strength, you might as well be totally quirkless. As if acting on an unspoken order, Nomu reached out, smashing a large hand down on Aizawa's unbroken arm. A loud snap sounded, a cry of pain leaving Aizawa. With the other hand, Nomu pulled Aizawa's head back and smashed his face into the ground hard enough to crack the cement floor beneath. Watching from the edge of the water, Midoriya and his two classmates stared in horror. This is bad. Midoriya ... Time for a change of plans? Yeah? Minta asked. Midoriya didn't even know what to say. Before them, Kurogiri appeared beside Shigaraki, informing him that one of the students had managed to get outside. At first, Shigaraki didn't show much reaction, simply saying, huh. But then he began to scratch his neck, the small amount of scratching escalating until he was fiercely clawing at his neck with both hands. Kurogiri, I'd turn you to dust if you weren't our ticket out of here. We won't stand a chance against dozens of pros. It's game over, man ... It's game over, for now. We're leaving, Shigaraki told his companion. Leaving? Did he just say they're leaving? Minta asked from the shoreline. I think so, Isui replied. We're saved. Yes, Minta said happily, jumping at Isui to hug her. In the midst of the hug, he ended up grabbing one of her breasts, leading to Isui pushing him under the water before turning to speak to Midoriya. I've got a bad feeling, Midoriya, she remarked. Yeah ... To do all this ... And then just leave on a whim. Midoriya really didn't like this. Shigaraki had claimed that his goal was to kill All Might. If they were to leave then, before All Might could show up, the school was just going to be more on alert. It would make it harder to break into the school in the future. Something wasn't right here. But before that, let's leave a few dead kids, Shigaraki said suddenly, turning to where Midoriya, Isui, and Minta were. In a flash, he was on the three, reaching for them, to wound the pride of the symbol of peace. As Midoriya watched Shigaraki reach for Isui in what felt like slow motion, the image of Aizawa's elbow deteriorating under Shigaraki's touch flashed into his head, just as his fingers touched Isui's face. Shigaraki stopped, nothing happening. You really are pretty cool. Eraserhead, Shigaraki remarked. Behind him, Aizawa had his eyes open and intent on Shigaraki, giving Midoriya and his classmates the opening they needed to react before Nomu smashed Aizawa's head into the ground, bringing an end to the effect of Aizawa's quirk. In that brief moment, Midoriya rounded on Shigaraki, pulling back a fist while yelling for him to get away from Isui. The punch landed, Midoriya was sure, his arm, thankfully, remaining unbroken. But when the smoke cleared, it wasn't Shigaraki he had hit, but Nomu, and with no damage to the creature at all. In that moment, Midoriya managed to figure out how they planned to kill All Might. Quite a move you just pulled off ... And with a smash too ... You a fan of All Might? Shigaraki asked. Well, whatever. Isui's tongue rocketed out, reaching for Midoriya as Nomu grabbed hold of his arm. All the while, Shigaraki reached for her and Minta, before he could lay a finger on either. With a resounding crash, the doors of the USJ blew in, completely flying off their hinges. Who entered through the demolished doors, had relief washing over all those who could see him. Fear not, I am here. There, standing at the top of the stairs, a fierce frown tugging down his lips instead of his usual smile, was All Might. Shigaraki's attention zeroed in on the hero with intensity. I had a bad feeling ... So I cut my talk with the principal short and came right away. Then I ran into Iida on the way. He told me the gist of what's going on here. All Might said, his anger obvious in his words. Gripping his tie, like he was about to loosen it, he ripped it clear off. It was clear that he was very angry at the treatment of his co-workers and students. With a single leap from the top of the stairs, he took down all of the small fry standing between him and Shigaraki, easily taking an unconscious Aizawa with him. Next, he flew past Shigaraki and Nomu before either could react, grabbing his three students and knocking the hand off Shigaraki's face. Next thing anyone knew, he had all three students and Aizawa clear of all enemies. Everyone, to the entrance. Take Aizawa. He's unconscious, so hurry, All Might ordered. In front of them, Shigaraki bent to pick up the hand, apologizing and calling it father before placing it back over his face. Throwing punches to save people. Kahaha, that's our state-sponsored violence. You're fast. Too fast to keep up with, but not as fast as expected. Could it really be true that you're getting weaker? Shigaraki asked. It's no use, All Might. That brain villain. My attack wasn't strong enough to break my own arm, but he didn't even flinch. Up against that, you, Midoriya, kid. All Might cut Midoriya off, turning to give him a smile. Fear not. With that, All Might jumped into the fight, attacking Nomu head-on. Nomu, completely unaffected by the attack, tried to grab All Might. All Might dodging and aiming another punch for Nomu's gut. Again, it didn't work. Seriously, no effect at all. All Might exclaimed. No effect, because he's got shock absorption. If you want to really damage Nomu, you'd be better off slowly ripping him apart, piece by piece. Not that he'll give you that chance. Shigaraki informed All Might. Thanks for the info. Appreciate it. All Might called back. No sweat. Getting up behind Nomu, All Might wrapped his arms around his waist and bent backwards, pulling Nomu up off his feet. The resulting crash from All Might slamming Nomu back into the ground blew a pillar of smoke straight into the air. Midoriya, who was carrying the top half of Aizawa's body while Mineta had grabbed his legs, turned to look, Mineta and Isui looking as well. How does suplex make an explosion like that? All Might's in a whole different league, Mineta remarked. Yet, he's a newbie as a teacher, with those cheat sheets and all. Isui added. Midoriya was more focused on the fact that, with Nomu, their enemies really might have a way to kill All Might, and the only person who knew what kind of trouble All Might was in was Midoriya himself. And it wasn't like they could help All Might either. They would only slow All Might down, and if one of them happened to be taken hostage, it would only make the situation all that more dire. Sudden cheering from above drew Midoriya's attention to where Uraraka and a few others were watching from the top of the stairs. From Mineta and Isui to Uraraka and the others, they were all cheering All Might on, all of them believing that, with the appearance of All Might, they were all going to be safe and sound. But Midoriya knew better, and as the smoke cleared, it revealed that instead of burying Nomu in the concrete, Kurogiri had opened a warp gate. Nomu came out the other side right under All Might's back, digging his claw deep into All Might's sides. So you hoped to drive him into the concrete and seal his movements. It wouldn't have worked. Nomu is as powerful as you. Well done, Kurogiri. Perfect timing, really. Shigaraki praised. All Might grit his teeth as Nomu's fingers dug deeper, one of the creature's hands having found his weak spot. Releasing Nomu's other hand, All Might focused on trying to pry free the fingers of the hand currently digging into his left side, but Nomu's grip wasn't budging. Impressive, for first-time offenders ... but prepare yourselves, All Might said, trying to cover up the fact that he was really in a bad spot. I can't say I much like the idea of having blood and guts inside my gate, but if they're yours, I'll happily oblige, Kurogiri said. You see, it's Nomu's job to get around that blinding speed of yours and hold you down. And it's my job to close the warp gate on you while you're halfway through and immobilized, thereby cutting you in two. Midoriya couldn't stay still any longer. Asutsuyu, Midoriya called. You finally got it right. Nice. What is it, Midoriya? Isui asked. Take Aizawa-sensei for me, Midoriya requested. Sure ... but what are you? Isui was cut off as Midoriya handed off Aizawa and turned back towards All Might. Before Midoriya knew what he was doing, he was running for All Might, intent of helping him. Before he could reach him, though, Bakugo flew into the scene, attacking Kurogiri. Get the hell out of here, Deku, Bakugo yelled, a crazed grin on his face as he finally made contact with Kurogiri, getting a hand on the bit of armor that Kurogiri wore around his neck. Bakugo was able to pin the villain to the ground. With Kurogiri down, ice begun to spread over the ground until it reached Nomu's feet. It then followed the creature's body through the warp gate and only stopped short of All Might's body so that it froze Nomu. But not All Might. So I heard you people are here to kill All Might, Todoroki remarked, stepping onto the scene. Kirishima was the next person to fly into the fray, aiming an attack for Shigaraki. Though he missed, it forced the villain a step further back from All Might. Midoriya, with tears of gratitude in his eyes, watched as his classmates stepped up in defense of their teacher. All Might was surprised, but thanks to the interference, he was able to completely pry open Nomu's grip, freeing himself. Shigaraki looked around at the five now before him. You've pinned down our way out ... well ... this is a problem, Shigaraki remarked. You slipped up, you bastard. And it's just like I thought, Bakugo remarked, grinning down at Kurogiri. The parts you can turn into that foggy warp gate are limited. And you're using that misty crap to hide your real body? Yeah. Am I right? If your whole body was mist and physical attacks didn't work, you'd never say that was a close one. Bakugo didn't need Kurogiri to answer to know he was right. Kurogiri tried to move, to get up, but Bakugo let off a little explosion, making the villain fall still once more. Don't move. If I decide you're doing anything fishy, I'll blow you straight to Kingdom Come. Bakugo threatened, grinning like he was having a little too much fun. That's not very hero-like, dude, Kirishima told Bakugo. Not that Bakugo really cared. Shigaraki watched the whole thing with his hands clasped before him, as if he wasn't really bothered by what was going on. Not only have you beaten our level, but you're all at full health. Today's kids really are something. Our League of Villains should be ashamed. Nomu, take out the explosive brat. We need our escape route back, Shigaraki ordered. With the warp gate still open, Nomu, his frozen limbs breaking and snapping off, was able to pull himself back through the gate. It ended up with him losing his right arm and leg, but it was as if the creature couldn't feel the pain. His body's falling apart, but he's still moving, Midoriya exclaimed. Get back, everyone, All Might called before something caught his eye. Namu's frozen and broken away limbs were growing back. What the? I thought his quirk was shock absorption. I don't remember saying that's all he can do. This is hyper-regeneration, Shigaraki remarked. Nomu is a super-powered living sandbag designed to withstand everything you've got. Nomu, as ordered, moved fast. Even All Might was surprised by his speed. Seeing that Nomu really was making for Bakugo, All Might reacted. To those watching, it was just like a sudden, strong gust of air that whipped past them. 1 second, Midoriya was calling out to Bakugo in worry, and the next, Bakugo was sitting next to Midoriya. Ka-chan, you dodged that. Wow, Midoriya said in awe and surprise. I didn't. Shut up, you, Bakugo replied, still in shock at what had happened. When the smoke cleared, it became clear what had happened. When Nomu had attacked Bakugo, All Might had jumped in, taking the hit while getting Bakugo out of the way. This guy doesn't know how to hold back, All Might remarked. Anything to save a comrade, right? Just like earlier when, that one the plain one. He came at me with everything he had. But violence in the name of saving others is admirable, isn't it, hero? Shigaraki asked. You know what, All Might? That pisses me off. Heroes and villains both thrive on violence, but we're still categorized. You're good, you're evil. That's how it is. Symbol of peace. In the end you're just a tool for violence, made to keep us down. And violence only breeds more violence. I'll show the world that by killing you. What a load of hooey. Idealistic criminals have a different sort of fire in their eyes. But you're just enjoying yourself, you big liar. All Might replied. You got me. Saw right through, Shigaraki said. It was impossible not to tell that the man had to be sneering behind that hand over his face. It's 3 on 5, Todoroki said. But Ka-chan showed us the missed man's weak point, Midoriya added. These are some brutal dudes, but with us supporting All Might we can beat him back, Kirishima agreed. No, get out of here, All Might ordered. Things wouldn't have gone so well if I hadn't just stepped in, Todoroki told All Might. All Might, you're bleeding and I think your time's you. Midoriya caught himself and trailed off. In response to his concern, All Might gave him a thumbs up, silently reassuring him. Right you are, Todoroki, so thanks for that. But fear not, sit back and watch a pro get serious, All Might told them. What happened next could be considered comical and anticlimactic all rolled into one. All Might was just psyching himself up, ready to face off with the villains when there was a sudden yell. Incoming, watch out. All Might took a step back as something suddenly went flying past him, crashing into the ground before continuing to roll. It took them all a moment to realize that what was rolling around was a pile of fighting limbs. It was 2 people fighting and one of them was a huge, mutant-type villain, and the other. I said get off. With a mighty heave of legs, the villain was sent rocketing off whoever he was fighting with, crashing into a wall with enough force to crack the concrete. A kick of feet brought whoever had been fighting the villain to their feet. Upon seeing who it was, several pairs of eyes widened. Leander Howen, who had been in the process of dusting herself off, looked up when her name was called. While her clothes were intact, the parts of her skin left bare by the clothing was bruised and cut. There were certain parts of her anatomy with such deep bruising that All Might was sure she had to either have bone-deep bruising or broken bones, despite the fact that didn't appear to be affected by her bruising one bit. Seeing the stunned faces of her classmates and one of her teachers, Howen smiled and raised a hand in greeting. Oh, hey guys, she greeted brightly. That moment of distraction cost Howen for. In the next instant, another villain came charging her from behind. As if she had known he was there the whole time, Howen jumped, the powerful push of her legs launching her into the air high enough to avoid the grab the man had made for her. Acting with fast reflexes, Howen reached back onto her belt, drawing a dagger from its sheath. As she pulled it before her, they could just detect the shine of a wire attached to the hilt of the dagger. With a flick of the wrist, she threw the dagger backwards, but the blade missed the man altogether, flying over his shoulder until it embedded itself deep into a stone wall a good 30 feet behind her. The villain laughed at her, but a smile simply curled Howen's lips as she gave the wire a tug. Heads up, just like during their battle training. There was the whirling sound of the wire being retracted, and the villain's eyes widened as Hallen's feet slammed into his face, carrying him backwards along with her. Her classmates winced when the two slammed into the rock face, the man finding himself crushed between Hallen's feet and the rock. With a little flip forward, Hallen landed on her feet, yanking on the wire to free the dagger. She caught the dagger and returned it to her belt, a pleased smile on her face as she glanced back at the now unconscious man. Even her tail gave a pleased curl. "I do believe that was the last of the ones that followed me," Hallen remarked, more to herself. Hallen really should have knocked on wood after saying that. A small ep left Hallen as another villain popped out of the woodwork, jumping from the top of the rock wall to take her down. Midoriya, Todoroki, Bakugo, and Kirishima could have sworn, just for a moment, that they heard Hallen hiss and spit like a cat as she started wrestling with the guy, the two rolling across the ground. Through a lot of wiggling and thanks to her smaller size, Hallen ended up on top, slamming both feet down on the guy's head to crack his head against the ground, knocking him out. "Phew, finally. Annoying little thugs, aren't that?" Hallen remarked, getting to her feet. "Annoying? You look like they handed your ass to you." Bakugo snapped at her. "I was relying sorely on hand-to-hand combat. Of course I got a little roughed up. Unlike you, I don't use my quirk unless I absolutely have to," Hallen replied. "Give me some credit for being able to handle multiple villains without the use of my quirk." "Whatever," Bakugo snapped, scoffing at her. When he turned his eyes away from her, Hallen's tail perked up and, slowly, a grin curled her lips. "Oh, can I take that scoff to mean you don't have any confidence that you could pull off the same feat?" she asked. Her grin definitely could be classified as the cat that caught the canary. Bakugo's temper blew at that. He snapped around to face her and would have charged right up to her if Kirishima hadn't stopped him. Hallen turned away from him, trying to look innocent of any wrongdoing. But the mischievous curl of her tail gave her away. In the next second, Hallen cleared the grin from her face, moving her attention onto the villains at hand. So the pesky kitty found her way back. Shigaraki sneered. One of Hallen's eyebrow twitched. She wasn't particularly fond of being called kitty. "Your way back?" Kirishima asked. "Yeah. When that warp gate man separated us, I landed in the middle of Aizawa-sensei's fight with the villains. Since my way to the exit was blocked, he had no choice but to let me fight with him. We got separated though when I got a good deal of the mutant types to follow me away since Aizawa-sensei's quirk doesn't work on them. I was more suited to fighting them anyway," Hallen answered before her eyes scanned the area around them. "Where is Aizawa-sensei?" "He was badly hurt. Asui and Minda took him to the exit," Midoriya told her. "Hurt?" Hallen's attention turned to Midoriya for a moment. It was easy to see the thoughts flying across her brain as her tail slowly sank as if she was upset. "I see. Oh, so the little kitty was unable to help as much as she thought," Shigaraki mocked, laughing. Hallen's eyes snapped to Shigaraki, as if she might be angry. But in the next moment, she, herself, laughed. Her hands went to her hips, her tail perking up once more as she grinned back at the man, as if she was now mocking him. "I am not so arrogant as to think I could possibly stand the chance of outshining a pro. I was merely thinking of getting myself safely out of here as Aizawa-sensei ordered me. Nothing more," Hallen replied. Whether or not she actually thought that lie was convincing, they couldn't tell, but All Might, at least, knew it for the fib it was. If Hallen really had only been looking out for herself, had really only been trying to follow Aizawa's order ... she wouldn't have come back to the plaza. Whatever she said, Hallen had been trying to help ease Aizawa's load, and when she had handled those who had been foolish enough to follow her, she had come back to help him some more, not knowing that he had already been taken down. She cared more than she was letting on. "Enough chatter. Let's clear the game and go home," Shigaraki yelled, charging towards Hallen's classmates. Despite All Might being right there, Hallen reacted as if out of instinct. She rammed into Shigaraki's side before he could reach her classmates. Thankfully, she took him by surprise and was able to roll free of him before he could get a grip on her. A few leaps backwards carried her out of reach of the man, until she was crouched a good 15 feet out of his reach. "I don't need your help," Bakugo snapped at her. "It's not exactly a response I can control. I see danger, my body reacts without my say-so. Simple as that," Hallen replied, her eyes fixed on Shigaraki, who was rounding on her, preparing to deal with her. Hallen's body tensed up, shifting until she had hands braced on the ground, her tail lashing once before her whole body drew still. All Might had seen that stance before, right before she had pounced on one of her classmates during battle training. Unless he stepped in, she would confront Shigaraki without hesitation if it meant protecting her classmates. In that sense, she was much like Midoriya. Before either could move, All Might leveled an intense glare their way that had Shigaraki instantly retreating away from Hallen and her classmate. Even Hallen froze under the intensity of that glare. She only relaxed when All Might turned his focus on Nomu, the two clashing with enough force that if either had been a normal man, several bones would have been reduced to dust. "He's got shock absorption. You already saw it yourself," Shigaraki called to All Might. Hallen's eyes could barely follow what came next. The punches All Might and Nomu exchanged flew by so quickly that if it wasn't for her better-than-average eyesight, she would have only seen a blur. As it was, she lost track of a majority of the hits. It's absorption, not negation. So he must have a limit. No, built to counter me, you say. Made to withstand everything I've got. Then I'll just go beyond that. All Might yelled back. The shock wave produced by the head-on blows had Hallen lowering herself close to the ground to keep from being knocked back onto her butt. She couldn't believe the power being displayed in front of her. While, yes, her own family consisted of strong heroes, none of them could match All Might in pure strength. Not even close. A hero's always ready to smash through trouble. All Might declared. Tell me, villain, do you know the meaning of plus ultra? Hallen leaned back, her eyes widening in awe as All Might sent Nomu flying, the creature crashing through the dome of the USJ and vanishing into the sky beyond. Her mouth formed an O, her tail flicking once as she continued to stare. She could never hope to stand up to such simple strength, no matter the plots she came up with. Brains could only do so much compared to bronze. Like straight out of the comics. He just smashed his way past the absorption. The ultimate bruiser, Kirishima remarked. And against that power ... the regeneration wasn't able to keep up with the rush of attack. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I could never come up with a way to get past such power, Hallen said confidently. And she was pretty confident in that assessment. She was clever, slippery, but that would only take her so far against someone with All Might's strength. Yep, I'm slowing down. In my heyday, 5 of those punches would have been enough, but that was over 300 hits just now, All Might declared, pounding a fist against his chest. 300. Man, my eyes really are too slow to keep up with All Might. I only counted 172. When Hallen said this, all 4 of her classmates turned to stare at her. The rest of them only saw a blur. How the hell had she been able to keep up enough to count off around half of the hits All Might landed? Didn't cross their minds that Hallen was used to watching her brothers who relied more on speed than strength. Well, villain, how about we hurry up and finish this? All Might asked Shigaraki. You cheated, Shigaraki declared. You've weakened. Not that I can see ... We're completely outmatched. How dare you do that to my Nomu? You cheated. He's not weak at all. They ... They lied to me. Shigaraki fiercely begun to scratch at his neck once more. Watching him made Hallen want to scratch herself. She couldn't imagine how awful his neck had to look on any given day. Well, coming to get me. What happened to clearing the game? If you can take me, then bring it on. All Might challenged. Hallen's head tilted to the side as she watched All Might. Was it just her ... or did All Might look like he was on his last leg? Surely her eyes were playing tricks on her. It was All Might she was looking at. While normal people had their limits, All Might wasn't normal. Right. If that was right ... Why did she get the bad feeling that she was wrong? Right ... We're not ready for this level yet, Todoroki said, turning to head away from the fight. Neither Hallen or Midoriya moved from their spots. Midoriya, Leander, we ought to just hang back for now. Rush in and they might take the 2 of you hostage. Yeah, I know, Hallen said, cutting off Kirishima. Her attention, though, remained completely focused on All Might and the villains he was facing. She remained in her crouched position, her tail idly swishing back and forth. She wasn't going to budge, not even an inch. She had a bad feeling building up in her gut and she was not about to ignore it. She had learned, a long time ago, that if she got that bad feeling, it was within her best interest to pay attention. Cat sense and all that jazz. Well, what's keeping you? All Might demanded. If only we still had Nomu. If only. He was taking those hits so well. Shigaraki muttered to himself. Tamura Shigaraki ... Calm yourself. It's apparent that Nomu did manage to deal some real damage, Hirajiri said, trying to calm Shigaraki. The kids are holding back for some reason, and reinforcements from the school are bound to arrive in a few minutes. But if the 2 of us double team him, we still have a chance. Yes ... Yes. Right. We can do this ... The final boss is standing right there, Shigaraki replied. While Midoriya, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Kirishima hadn't heard the conversation between the 2 villains, Hallen had. If anything, Hallen tensed, her resolve to stay right where she was, only growing. All Might'll take care of the big bats. Let's go see if we can help the others, Kirishima said, him, Todoroki, and Bakugo turning to walk away from the battle. When Midoriya and Hallen didn't move to follow them, Todoroki turned back to look at them. Midoriya, Leander, he called. Neither were listening. Bakugo and Kirishima turned back to look as well, noticing when Hallen tensed, her body shifting as if she was getting ready to pounce. This is revenge for Nomu, Shigaraki declared as he and Kirajiri attacked All Might as one. In the next instant, Midoriya was gone from Hallen's side, having used his quirk to rocket launch himself into the fray in order to save All Might. He yelled at the 2 villains to get away from All Might as he aimed his attack for the neck armor Kirajiri wore. In response to his attack, Kirajiri opened a warp gate, allowing Shigaraki to pass his hand through him in order to reach for Midoriya. Seeing the threat, Hallen was the next to react. Shigaraki's eyes widened as he was suddenly grabbed by the collar, Hallen suddenly jumping onto his back to pull him backwards. Fighting against the pull of her weight on his back while still reaching for Midoriya was proving to be a little more than he could handle. Shigaraki reached back, aiming to grab Hallen, but the girl was quicker. She latched onto his wrist with one hand and did something that had her classmates making faces. She bit him. Shigaraki cursed, yanking to try to pry his hand free. Hallen released his hand only to bit his forearm. Another curse left Shigaraki. Hallen knew it wasn't exactly the most mature thing to do, certainly not dignified, but it was distracting Shigaraki enough. Hallen had just released his arm and was leaning back to drag him back with her weight when a bullet suddenly shot past her, taking out the hand reaching for Midoriya. Shigaraki yanked back in pain. Concerned with the incoming fire, Kurogiri reacted quickly, warping Hallen off Shigaraki's back. Next thing Hallen knew, she was, once again, falling through air. Thankfully, she had only been warped a couple dozen feet and Todoroki was there to catch her. For a moment, Hallen blinked in surprise before she turned her eyes to Todoroki. "Thanks for the catch, Todoroki," she told him. "No problem," he replied. Safe from falling and from Shigaraki's quirk, Hallen turned her attention to figuring out where the bullet had come from. Her eyes quickly found the source as someone spoke. "Sorry, everyone. We're a little late. We brought everyone we could." There, at the top of the stairs, stood the principal, Iida, and about 10 other teachers. The bullets turned out to be the weapon of choice for one of the teachers, Snipe, president of Class 1A, Iida Tenya, reporting for duty. Iida called in greeting. "Good on you, Iida," Hallen called in praise of her classmate. Seeing that more pro-heroes had arrived as backup, Shigaraki thought it best to retreat. Before he could, though, Snipe rained a hail of bullets down on him and Kurogiri. Several hit their marks, leaving Shigaraki full of holes. 13, though not in the best of shape, stepped in then, trying to capture the two villains with his black hole. Kurogiri was faster, drawing Shigaraki into his warp gate. Before the two vanished, Shigaraki left them all with one last word. "I may have failed here, symbol of peace, but next time we meet, you're dead, All Might." With that, the two were gone. While Hallen was naturally a positive person, this whole situation had left a bad taste in her mouth, and that wasn't because of Shigaraki's blood on her tongue. She had a sinking feeling that this was not the last time she was going to see Shigaraki. It was only when she tried to turn to check on Midoriya that she realized something. Todoroki was still holding her. Todoroki. Todoroki glanced at Hallen, who gave him a sheepish smile with her bruised face. "You mind putting me down now?" "Oh, right." Todoroki set her on her feet. Once she was on her feet again, he gave her a once-over, his eyes taking in the many bruises coloring her skin. He had to wonder if she was all right, but she seemed just fine. He held his tongue as Hallen turned to Kirishima, who was hurrying over to check on Midoriya. Before a word could be said to her, she joined Kirishima, concerned for Midoriya. "Midoriya, you okay?" Kirishima called as the two ran towards him. Both were forced to come up short, a sound like what one would hear from a startled cat, escaping Hallen's lips when a wall of cement suddenly sprouted to being in front of them. Surprised, the two turned to Cementos, who had formed the wall. "We need to make sure all you students are safe, so head over to the gate. I'll deal with the wounded," Cementos told them. "Makes sense. Roger that. Come on, Leander," Kirishima said, turning to Hallen. Hallen gave Cementos a polite bow, telling him a quick, "Please take care of them," before she turned and followed her classmate. The students were gathered up outside, a few different teachers stopping Hallen to inquire if she was all right with the amount of bruising she had. Hallen insisted, every time, that she was fine and felt no pain. Once they all were gathered, one police officer named Tsukachi counted them off, making sure they had everyone. 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Besides the one with the messed up legs, looks like they're all unharmed. Though, Tsukachi turned to Hallen. Hallen blinked back in questioning as he looked her over. "You sure you're all right, kid?" Hallen gave him a wide smile, reaching up to somewhat sheepishly scratch her cheek. All eyes of her classmates focused on her as she waved the other hand in front of her. "Oh, I'm fine. I don't feel a thing. A bath and a few days' worth of healing and I'll be molting my way back to perfect," Hallen assured him. "Besides, all of the bruising and cuts were restricted to the areas of my skin not covered by the material of my costume." "Really?" Uraraka asked. "Yeah. When I put in my costume design forms, I knew, given my quirk, that I would need a costume that covered the least amount of skin as possible. So I made sure to request that what material there was be made from a similar material that Aizawa-sensei's scarf is made from." See, Hallen unzipped her hoodie fully, pulling it back to show that all of her bruising stopped wherever her skin was covered by material. "The stockings, gloves, and even the bottoms and top are made from the same material. I needed something that could really take a beating and hold up. It's why I didn't understand why Aizawa-sensei looked at me when he said something about costumes not being suited for today's exercises." "Wow, you really thought out your costume, huh, Chan?" Isui remarked. You should see all the little goodies I requested they put in the inside pockets, Helen said, holding out her hoodie to show off the dozens of pockets that lined the inside of the hoodie. I try not to rely on my quirk if I can help it. And you ended up in the plaza with Aizawa-sensei? Sero asked. Yeah, I was, literally, dropped right in the middle of the fight. Not exactly a pleasant experience, but definitely a learning one, Helen replied, zipping her hoodie back up. As long as you think you're all right enough to back to school. And not directly to the nurse's office, Tsukachi told her. I assure you, sir, I'm fine. I honestly don't feel a lick of pain, Helen promised. Good, we're gonna get you kids back to the classroom for now. This is no time to take your statements, Tsukachi said, turning to look at all of the students. What about Aizawa-sensei? Is he Is he all right? Helen asked. She had been the one to end up with Aizawa, to fight alongside him. She had also been the one to make the choice to try to lead some of the villains away. For all she knew, he could have been distracted by her sudden disappearance, leading to him getting hurt. She would never forgive herself if that was the case. Seeing how concerned she was, Tsukachi pulled his cell phone out, putting in a call to the hospital to check on Aizawa. He news he gave them was far from reassuring. Both arms were smashed to splinters. His face is also fractured. Thankfully, he doesn't have any brain damage. But his eye sockets have been pulverized. There's a chance he may suffer long-term loss of vision. Or so I hear, Tsukachi told them. Helen pressed a hand to her stomach. It felt like her guts were twisting. She swallowed back the bile rising in her throat and thought positively. At least Aizawa was alive, and with Recovery Girl working with the school, he would recover. She just had to have faith that his eyesight would recover as well. And 13 Sensei and All Might? Helen asked. What about them? 13 has terrible lacerations across his back and upper arms, but his life isn't in danger. All Might's injuries aren't life-threatening either. It's possible that Recovery Girl's healing will be enough for him, so he's gone off to the nurse's office, Tsukachi answered. And Deku? Uraraka asked. What of Midoriya? Iida added. Midori. It seems he also made it to the nurse's office in time. And I actually have business there myself. Sansa, Tsukachi called, turning to one of his officers. I'll leave the rest to you. Detective. Tsukachi turned to Helen when she called out. There wasn't a smile on Helen's face as she gripped the front of her hoodie. If you see them all, could you please give all of the teachers and Midoriya my well wishes? She asked. With a smile on his face, Tsukachi reached out, patting the top of Helen's head. Helen's tail curled in surprise, and when he removed his hand, she looked up at him. I'll make sure to do that. You get on to class, he told her. A smile curled Helen's lips and she gave a nod. She thanked him before she turned to go join her classmates, her tail swaying happily behind her. He watched her walk away, the principal and a few teachers watching as well. We'll need to completely revamp our security systems, the principal remarked. Teleportation quirks are rare enough. Shame one of them had to go and turn villain. Midnight added. Detective Tsukachi. Tsukachi turned as one of his officers came up to him, saluting him. I have a report. We've apprehended what seems to be a villain in a thicket about 400 meters from here. In what condition? Tsukachi asked. He seems unharmed, and he didn't resist arrest. Oddly enough, he's not responding in any way. He appears to be mute, the officer replied. Tsukachi turned to the principal then. Principal, I'd like to go over the school with a fine-toothed comb, if you don't mind, Tsukachi said. Of course. I'm sure some won't be happy, but the police certainly have jurisdiction. Investigations are your field of expertise. Do what you feel is necessary, the principal replied. Tsukachi nodded. The day had been a long one with the students of WhatIf facing trials they had not been prepared to face just yet, but everyone had come out of it in one piece. In a small bar miles away, that wasn't exactly the case. The low groan left Shigaraki as he was laid carefully on the floor of the bar. I was shot, both arms and both legs. We got crushed. He got Nomu too. Our cannon fodder was taken down in a flash. Even those kids were strong. The symbol of peace is in perfect health. You were wrong, master. No, I wasn't. This voice came from a monitor set up at the end of the bar. We merely got ahead of ourselves. Yes. We underestimated him. Good thing that League of Villains came cheap. Came a second voice from the monitor. Anyway. What of our creation? Nomu, did you retrieve him? He was sent flying. And unless we ascertain his precise coordinates, no amount of warping will let us find him. I just couldn't spare the time back there, Kurogiri explained. After all the trouble we went through to make him as strong as All Might. Well. That's too bad. A real shame, said the voice Shigaraki called master. Strong, right. There was one kid who seemed just as fast as All Might. And another annoying little kitty. She bit me, Shigaraki muttered. Oh, master asked. Without those two, we might have killed All Might. But those kids, those brats, Shigaraki added. No use crying over spilled milk. This endeavor was not a complete loss. Find strong troops. Take all the time you need. We can't move freely. That's why we need a symbol like you. Tamura Shigaraki. Next time, the world will know of the terror you represent, Master told him. While back at UA, Helen and her classmates were reflecting on the day and the fear they had learned when coming face to face with villains. They had no idea that things were about to get a whole lot worse. But, sitting there on a bench in the changing room, Helen got a really bad feeling in her stomach. If she knew anything better than anything else in the world, it was one thing. Her gut instinct was almost always correct. Things wouldn't remain peaceful for long. Classes the next day were cancelled due to the incident at the USJ. Despite that, Helen, like her classmates, found she couldn't rest easy. She was glad when, the following day, she was able to get back to class. She was sitting at her desk, book in hand, when Iida came flying up to front of the classroom. Everyone, morning homeroom's about to begin. To your seats, Iida called. We're sitting. You're the only one up, Sero told him. Grumbling to himself, Iida made his way to his desk, the others grinning and laughing lowly. Helen smiled herself as she put her book away. Not moments later, the door of the classroom opened and, to the class's surprise, Aizawa, heavily bandaged, walked into the classroom. Morning, he greeted as if he didn't currently look like a mummy. You're back already, Aizawa-sensei. The class yelled. Talk about being a pro, Helen said in awe. Glad to see you're doing well, sensei, Iida called. From the way Aizawa wobbled up to his desk, Helen wouldn't call it doing well. It was more as if he had no choice but to continue trudging on, something Helen could really respect. My welfare isn't important, Aizawa said. Helen really wanted to protest that simply wasn't true, but she doubted he would listen to her. After all, he was the pro, not her. Because your fight is far from over. Our fight? Bakugo asked. Don't tell me. Midoriya started. More villains. Mind to wind, already covering his head. Helen doubted that was what this was about. After all, Aizawa had a way with freaking them out only for it to turn out to be something completely mundane. UAS Sports Festival is fast approaching, Aizawa announced. And there it is, completely ordinary. Once again, Helen thought, shaking her head as an idle smile fell on her lips. Come on, we just had that villain sure about this. Someone asked. It's necessary to demonstrate that UAS crisis management protocols are sound. That's the thinking, apparently, Aizawa told them. Compared to past years, there'll be 5 times the police presence. Anyhow, our sports festival is the greatest opportunity you'll get. It's not an event that can be cancelled over a few villains. You sure about that? Minda asked. Minda ... Are you telling me you've never seen UAS Sports Festival? Midoriya asked. Of course I have. That's not what I mean, Minda replied. Oh, but Ha-chan, you aren't from Japan, so you might not know, Midoriya said, turning several pairs of eyes to Helen. Actually, UAS Sports Festival was always a big event in my house. Even in Italy, we still like to watch. UA is a top-tier school no matter where in the world you are, and we don't have something like the sports festival in Italy. Well ... Not so big of an event, anyway, so I was always extremely intrigued by the event. I've been looking forward to this since I got my acceptance letter from the school, Helen replied. She remembered so many years, growing up, in which she would find herself on the couch with her brothers, intent on the screen as they watched UAS Sports Festival. She even remembered how, when she was 10, she declared that she would go to the school that hosted the event. Since then, that had been her goal, and now, here she sat. Our sports festival is one of Japan's biggest events. The Olympics were once the world's sports festival. The whole country would be whipped into a frenzy over them. But as you know, that tradition has shrunk in scale to a shell of its former self. And as far as Japan's concerned, what's taken the place of the Olympics is the UA Sports Festival, Aizawa said. Basically, the nation's top heroes will be there as scouts, watching to see which of us have the potential to be recruited as sidekicks. Helen remarked. They'll be looking to hire us as sidekicks after we graduate. That's how it's done, Kaminari agreed. And a lot of those sidekicks never manage to go solo. They're sidekicks forever. That'll be you, Kaminari, you dunce, Gyro remarked. Naturally, you'll gain valuable experience and popularity if you're picked up by a big-name hero. But your time is limited. Show the pros what you're made of here, and you'll make futures for yourselves. This happens once a year ... So you've got 3 chances. If you're hoping to become a hero, this is an event you can't miss, Aizawa told them. It was an event that Helen had been preparing herself for, and one that had the class abuzz for the next 3 class periods. Come lunch, it was all the class could talk about. Even after what we just went through ... This has got me so freaking pumped, Kirishima said. If we show our stuff here, that's one big step towards going pro, Sero added. Helen watched her excited classmates as she gathered what she would need for lunch. Most of the class seemed to be in an uproar. It was nice to see them all excited and happy after what had happened. Even Iida seemed pumped up. Everyone's so excited, Midoriya remarked. And you aren't. This is our chance to add our names to the ranks of heroes. Of course we're in high spirits, Iida proclaimed. You got a funny way of showing it, Iida. Weird, Asui remarked when Ida's way of showing his excitement was tensing up to the point he was shaking. Yeah, I get that. But Midoriya trailed off when Uraraka called out to him and Iida. Deku, Iida ... at this sports festival ... let's do our best, she said, her face reflecting her tensed anticipation. What the? You're not looking very Uraraka. Uraraka, Mina remarked. Helen, a smile on her face, watched as Uraraka tried to lead her classmates in a cheer of I'm gonna crush this. The silliness of the whole thing had Helen shaking her head as she grabbed her wallet from her school bag. Hey, Ha-chan. Helen looked up when Uraraka called out to her. Uraraka hurried over to Helen's desk. You want to have lunch with us? Oh, I'll catch up with the three of you. I have something I need to do first, Helen replied, leaving her friend staring after her with a confused look. Helen left the classroom just ahead of Todoroki. When she turned to head in the opposite direction of the lunchroom, Todoroki stopped to look after her, wondering what she was off to do. In the end, he dismissed it as not his business and went on ahead. Helen, not paying attention to who she passed or the looks thrown her way, hurried down the hall, hoping he would catch the person she was looking for before he got somewhere she couldn't follow. Thankfully, as she rounded a corner, she saw him up ahead and quickened her pace to catch up with him. Aizawa-sensei. Aizawa, when he heard Helen's voice, turned to find the girl hurrying towards him. When she was sure she had his attention, she stopped a good 10 feet from him. For a moment, her eyes merely took in his bandaged face before her expression tensed and she bowed to him. Leander, what are you doing? He asked. I'm sorry, Aizawa-sensei. Aizawa could only stare at Helen. He had no idea what she was going on about or what she had to be sorry for. But it wasn't like Helen to do something for no reason whatsoever, so he knew there had to be a reason behind this sudden outburst. What are you talking about? He asked. I thought if I could lead some of the villains away, it would lighten your load just a bit. If I, in any way, caused you to be distracted because I suddenly vanished, then I am so terribly sorry, Helen told him. Now he got it. Helen was concerned that she had, in some way, lead to, at least, a few of his injuries. It only went to show that the girl really had a kind heart. She had probably spent all of the last 2 days blaming herself and mentally ripping herself a new one. Of course, she couldn't control where she had been warped to and she had done her best against the villain. Even now, she was still covered in bruises here and there, refusing to go see Recovery Girl for something so minor. Helen didn't move from her bowed position, her tail hanging in what he was sure was shame. Heaving a sigh, Aizawa turned towards her and, careful of his injuries, removed an arm from its sling. It was no more than a soft thump on the head with his cast, but it had Helen looking up at him in surprise. Relax, kid. None of these were your fault. I was well aware that you probably had some kind of plan in that head of yours. That's your strong suit, after all. Besides, I told you to take any chance you got to get out of there. So stop blaming yourself. You got a lot of more important things to focus your attention on other than me, he told her. For a moment, she stared at him in a mix of awe and gratitude. Then, finally, a smile curled her lips and she gave him a nod, smiling brightly at him while her tail curled. Right, she agreed. The sports festival. Right, now get going. You're keeping us both from lunch, he told her, pulling his arm back and carefully tucking it away in its sling. Yes, sir. Thank you, Aizawa-sensei, Helen said, giving him another quick bow before she turned on her heel and took off down the hall, her tail happily swaying after her. Aizawa watched her for a moment, somewhat amused and pleased. Many of his students had good hearts or a good head on their shoulders. Leander Howen had both. Even though he still didn't know what her quirk was, he was sure that she would make a good hero one day. A kind hero truly concerned with the well-being of the people around her. He couldn't wait to see what she, like the rest of her class, brought to the table at the sports festival. 000-0. All Might invited him to have lunch with him. Helen stared at Iida and Uraraka. She had just, moments before, joined them for lunch, the three standing in line for their food. When she had joined them and saw that Midoriya was missing, she had asked where he had went. Uraraka and Iida had then filled her in that All Might had asked Midoriya to have lunch with him. Yeah, wonder what he wants with Deku, Uraraka said. I heard Midoriya, along with Leander, dashed in to help when All Might was attacked. Maybe it's about that, Iida suggested. I rushed in more to help Midoriya than All Might. When I saw Midoriya in danger, my body kind of just moved. Next thing I know, I'm clinging to Handy Mandy like a spider monkey. Helen replied, sheepishly scratching one cheek. Handy Mandy, Uraraka asked. You know, that villain with all the hands all over him? Helen explained, Uraraka catching on. Yeah, him. Anyway, I think it might have something more to do with what Tsuyu said and that it's because All Might and Midoriya have similar, super strength-oriented quirks. She has a point. Perhaps All Might has taken a liking to him. I wouldn't be surprised, Iida said. Unknown to them, ahead of them in line, Todoroki was listening to their conversation. Anyway, what was it you had to do before lunch, Ha-chan? Uraraka asked. Oh, that. Helen folded her arms over her chest. her tail dropping to somewhat curl between her legs. Her friends took that to mean that she was embarrassed, though her face didn't show it. I had to go see Aizawa-sensei. What? What for? You aren't in trouble, are you? Iida asked. Helen waved a hand in front of her face as she shook her head. No, I'm not in trouble. I went to apologize, Helen admitted. Apologize? For what? Uraraka asked. Well, Helen heaved a sigh, figuring she might as well just explain it. You two know I ended up in the middle of his fight with the villains during the incident, right? Yeah, Uraraka confirmed. Well, there was a moment when I had most of the mutant types focused on me, so I took the chance ... and I ran. When her classmates stared at her, Helen gave them a smile. It's not like you think. I didn't run away. I lured them away from the plaza, hoping to lighten Aizawa-sensei's load. When I got back and I found out how badly he had been injured, I thought that maybe, just maybe, part of those injuries were because he got distracted when I vanished suddenly. So you ... you blamed yourself. Uraraka said. Yeah, Helen rubbed the back of her neck. If truth be told, she still kind of felt bad. But she knew now that she wasn't to blame for Aizawa's injuries. She felt more sorry for Aizawa and the fact that he had to walk around in the state he was in. You know that wasn't your fault, Leander. Iida told her. Yeah, I know that ... now. Aizawa-sensei told me the same thing. I still felt like I had to apologize. My mother always told me that even if you aren't sure, if you think there might be a chance that it's your fault, it's best to talk to the person and apologize if it is your fault. Helen replied. I just wouldn't have felt right if I didn't apologize. Iida and Uraraka could understand and didn't push any further. The three grabbed their lunches and retreated to their seats. So, Ha-chan, are your brothers going to come to the sports festival? Uraraka asked. I'll ask them, but more than likely, they'll end up watching it on the TV. Hero business keeps them pretty busy back home. Not to mention that by the time the sports festival rolls around, they're probably going to be really mad at me. Helen replied. Why's that? Uraraka asked. I kinda, sorta ... didn't tell them about the incident at the USJ. You didn't. Helen smiled sheepishly at her friends, holding her hands up in front of her. The guard at the desk of her apartment building had reacted the same way when she had made him swear not to say anything to her brothers about the whole incident. Her brothers would find out soon enough. It's not a big deal. It's just ... if they found out that something like that happened within just my first month of school here, they would want to pull me from school. I just want to be able to prove that I can survive something like that without their interference and continue with life. They'll find out soon enough, Helen explained. Whether Iida and Uraraka agreed or not, it was Helen's choice, so they left it at that and moved on to other subjects. After lunch, they headed back to class and made it through the rest of the day. At the end of class, they all got a big surprise. Uraraka, who had just opened the door to their classroom to leave, froze when she was confronted with a mob of students just standing there, waiting. What's going on? Uraraka exclaimed. No way out. What are they here for? Iida asked. Scoping out the competition, small fry. Bakugo replied. Insulted and upset, Iida turned a hurt and insulted face on Midoriya, pointing at Bakugo as if to say, you see what your childhood friend just said. Midoriya could only give him a sheepish smile in return while Bakugo walked right up to the doorway, facing the other students outside. 'Cause we're the kids who survived a villain attack. Makes sense they'd want to look before the sports festival. No point, though. Move aside, cannon fodder. Bakugo added, sourly. Can we please not resort to calling those we don't even know cannon fodder? Iida complained from behind Bakugo. Helen, who was still at her desk, collecting her things, looked up. Leave it to Bakugo to issue a challenge and succeeded in making every student outside the classroom hate every student inside. She shook her head as she tucked the last of her books into her bag and headed for the door. It's true, we came to get a look, but you sure are modest. Are all the kids in the hero course like this one? One student, a boy named Shinso, stepped to the front of the crowd to face Bakugo. Even with Bakugo making a face that ranged around an 8 on Helen's awful face's radar, the boy seemed unfazed. Gotta say, I'm a little disillusioned if this is what you're offering. Those of us who didn't make the hero course are stuck in general studies and the other tracks. There are quite a few of us. Did you know that? Shinso asked. Depending on the results of this sports festival, they might consider transferring us to the hero course. I understand the reverse is also possible for you. Scoping out the competition. For a general studies kid like me, this'll be the perfect chance to knock you off your pedestals. Consider this a declaration of war. So daring, Helen would give him one thing. He certainly had guts and she liked that. It meant a person was willing to fight for their dreams, and that always spoke of a person with true strength. Suddenly another student spoke up from the crowd. This one from the neighboring hero course class. Hey, I'm from class 1B, next door. Heard you guys fought some villains. Wanted to find out more. But all I'm seeing is this arrogant bastard. He yelled. You better not make fools of the hero course at this thing. arrogant bastard. That'd be you, little Ka-chan, Hallen remarked from behind Bakugo, who scoffed back at her. Whatever, Bakugo retorted before shoving his way past the students outside the classroom. Wait, you jerk. What are you doing to us? Thanks to you we've got a whole mob of haters now. Kirishima complained at Bakugo. I don't give a crap. I'm heading for the top. Why should I care? Bakugo retorted before he was gone. To so straightforward and manly, Kirishima remarked. The top ... he's not wrong. Takoyami agreed. Don't let him play you. All he's doing is winning us enemies. Kaminari snapped. In a way, Bakugo has a point. All eyes turned to Hallen as she stepped up to the doorway to leave as well. Whether Bakugo said all of that or not, there are tons of students in the other classes that are going to dislike us because we were put above them just because we managed not to get killed when villains came after All Might. It seems ridiculous to us because we had to fight through that, but that's how it is. I say we should take that challenge and use it to push ourselves to be better. So I'm going to look at this as a chance to grow. Whatever people think of me, I'm not here to try to please everyone. I'm here to be a hero. Plain and simple. With that, Hallen gave the students blocking the doorway a wide smile and asked nicely that they step out of the way so she could leave. Surprised by her opposite of Bakugo attitude, the students before her stepped back, giving Hallen a path through the crowd. Hallen, with a brilliant smile, bowed to them in thanks. Thank you. Have a nice day, she told them before she, too, left. Midoriya watched her in surprise. While Hallen and Bakugo had different outlooks, different viewpoints on what drove them to their goals were the same, the top. Midoriya wasn't sure what drove Hallen to be a hero. She didn't share, but he could tell that it drove her just as hard as everyone else's reason. Everyone had a reason, whatever it may be, and everyone was going to try their hardest. It was only right that Midoriya try his hardest too. The next 2 weeks was abuzz with training and preparing. Determined to give their all, the whole of class 1 prepared themselves, each in their own way. Some teamed up to help each other while others trained alone. Hallen was one of the few that spent the next 2 weeks training in secret. She had a huge advantage since no one, not even her own teachers and classmates, knew what her quirk was. She was going to use that to her advantage and see how far in the sports festival she could get without revealing it. She would reveal her quirk, but she would do it at a time of her choosing. She couldn't wait to see everyone's faces when they found out. Gather round, mass media. It's time once again to see the high schoolers you know and love revel in their youth. It's UAS Sports Festival. Everybody ... Are you ready? Today was the day. As President Mike's voice rang out over the arena, Hallen could practically feel her fur standing on end in anticipation. She was currently gathered in the prep room with the rest of her class, waiting for their call to enter the stadium. She was sure that her excitement and anticipation was going to make her start bouncing about the room. She was ready to get moving. Instead, she settled for running her fingers through the fur on her tail. It always worked wonders for calming her. Is everyone good and ready? The event's about to begin. Iida called in warning. Wish I could have worn my costume, Mina remarked. They're not allowed, in the interest of fairness, Ajiro replied. Especially Ha-chan's. Now that's a deadly costume, for more reasons than one, Mina said, looking over at Hallen. Though the way she wears her gym clothes isn't any better. Hallen, blinking in innocent confusion, looked up. Like everyone else in their class, she was wearing the gym uniform. Unlike everyone else, Hallen had the pants legs folded up to mid-thigh and she wore the jersey halfway unzipped to show off the sports bra-like top she wore under it. A top that was surely a size or two too small for her chest, for it looked like she was about to spill out of it. To top it off, she had added a pair of black, calf-high, toeless and heelless boots that molded to her calf like a second skin. Minta had been staring and drooling since she had entered the room. What's that supposed to mean? Hallen asked. Only that you show way too much skin, Mina replied. Yeah, well ... if I explain, yet again, how it's kind of necessary given the nature of my quirk, you're all just going to question me, again, on what my quirk is and I'm not telling. Hallen replied. With that, Hallen turned away from her friend, her tail curling in amusement when Mina replied with, stingy, to her remark. Hallen wasn't about to give up her biggest advantage in this festival. Midoriya, Todoroki suddenly calling out to Midoriya, had everyone turning to watch. Todoroki ... What is it? Midoriya asked. Objectively speaking, I'm stronger than you, more capable, Todoroki said. Oh, yes, because that's such a good way to start a conversation, Hallen muttered lowly to Uraraka and Asui, who nodded in agreement with her. All Might's got his eye on you, doesn't he? Now I'm not about to pry into why that is, but I will beat you, Todoroki announced. Ooh, a declaration of war from the strongest in the class, Kaminari remarked. Hey, man, why pick a fight now? We're about to go on, Kirishima said, laying a hand on Todoroki's shoulder. Todoroki shrugged his hand off, his attention focused solely on Midoriya. I really don't care. I'm not pretending to be anyone's friend here, Todoroki replied. Todoroki, I'm not sure why you felt the need to tell me you'll beat me. You're clearly stronger and I can't measure up to most of the others here in skill. Objectively speaking, even. Midoriya trailed off. Don't be so negative, Midoriya. No need. But Midoriya cut Kirishima off to continue. Everyone ... even the kids from the other courses are aiming for the top. And I'm ... well, let me say this. I'm not gonna fall behind. I'm going for it too. With everything I've got. It made for a tense opening to the sports festival, but Helen liked the feeling. It made her feel even more ramped up for the festival. With the declaration of war out of the way, they made their way to where they would enter the stadium. The first year stage. The students are coming out. It's UAS Sports Festival, the one time each year when our fledgling heroes compete in a ruthless grand battle. First up ... you know who I'm talking about. The miraculous rising stars who brushed off a villain attack with their steely willpower. The first years of the hero course. It's Class A. When President Mike called their class, Helen entered the stadium at the head of her class with Midoriya on one side and Iida on the other. Once she was out in the sunlight, Helen's eyes scanned the mass amount of people in the stands, watching them. So this was what it felt like being on the other end of the TV screen. Helen was sure her heart would jump right out of her chest. It was thumping so hard. What a crowd, Midoriya said, shaking in his shoes. And we're expected to put on the best performance we can in front of so many spectators. I suppose this is merely one more necessary skill if we hope to become heroes. Iida remarked. They're really giving us too much credit ... but we won't let it shake us, right, Bakugo? Kirishima asked. Nope, just gets me pumped up, Bakugo replied. Helen wasn't quite sure she agreed. She wasn't usually one for the limelight. But here, right then, if she hoped to go anywhere in the hero world, then she was just going to have to deal with it. The rest of the classes were introduced before the ref for the first years was announced to be Midnight. Helen took one look at Midnight's costume and really couldn't see why some people complained about her costume. Midnight looked half naked, even if she wasn't really. At least Helen's looked somewhat decent. Now for the athlete's oath, Midnight called. So that's the R-rated hero, Midnight, Helen remarked. R-rated. Should she really be in a high school? Takoyami asked. Shut it. Pipe down. Your student representative is from Class 1A, Bakugo Katsuki, Midnight announced. Helen had a really bad feeling that Bakugo was going to do something that would turn every one of the students around her and her classmates against them. Sure enough, only one thing left Bakugo's mouth and it did exactly what Helen feared it would. The athlete's oath ... make no mistake about it. I'm gonna take first place, Bakugo announced. Helen heaved a sigh as several of the other students started yelling at Bakugo, lumping the rest of Class 1 in with him. Why must you show contempt for the dignity of this event? Iida demanded of Bakugo. Because he wouldn't be Bakugo if he didn't, Helen replied. Besides, I think, in his own way, he's pushing himself too. Midoriya turned a surprised look on Helen. He was surprised she had picked up on that. Then again, Helen seemed like the kind of person that wanted to see the good in those around her. Now, without any delay, let's get the first event started, Midnight called out. Everything at UAS always without delay, Uraraka remarked. Of course it is. Heroes don't have the luxury of taking their time, Helen replied. You got a point, Uraraka conceded. Giving Uraraka a smile, Helen turned back to watch the board behind Midnight as a virtual slot was sent spinning. These are the qualifiers. It's in this stage that so many are sent home crying every year, Midnight called out. And the fateful first event this year is ... this. Midnight gestured to the screen behind her as the slot spun to a stop, landing on obstacle course race. Helen let out a low, huh. It wasn't a bad noise, just one of intrigue. Yeah, she was sure she could pass this with little issue. It's a race between every member of all 11 classes. The course is a 4-kilometer lap around the stadium itself. Our school preaches freedom in all things. So as long as you don't go off the course, anything is fair game, Midnight announced. Racers to your positions. Helen made sure she ended up on the outside of the group. For her and her intents, it was better to be caught between a wall and people than several people elbowing her from all sides. Midoriya, on the other hand, ended up in the thick of it. When the light hit green and the start buzzer rang, everyone surged forward as one. It didn't take Midoriya long to realize that the starting gate was narrow so that it would act as the first filter, something Todoroki took full advantage of. The moment he cleared the gate, he froze the ground, catching several off guard. He didn't, however, catch everyone. Several, mostly his own classmates, made it past his ice, one way or another. But even kids from other classes made it past. I expected it from our class, but more made it past than I thought would, Todoroki remarked to himself. Good thinking, staying 2 steps behind Todoroki. Now it's my turn, Minda called, using his balls to avoid touching the ice. How about a taste of my killer? Minda was cut off when the next obstacle made an appearance, knocking Minda off to the side. Standing before the students was the robot villains from the entrance exam. There are even several of the zero-pointers. They block the way to the rest of the course. So these are the faux villains they used for everyone else's test. Todoroki asked, where'd they find the money for these? Yaoyorozu demanded. Todoroki had to admit that they were big, but he kind of wished the teachers had prepared something a little more threatening. It was a little disappointing. Dropping to one knee, he touched the ground, the temperature of the air around him dropping, especially because dear old dad is watching. Todoroki remarked to himself. With an upswing of his hand, he froze the robots in place before quickly dashing between their legs to continue on. He stopped them. We can get through that gap. Someone called to the others. Bad idea. I froze them in pretty unstable positions. Todoroki called back, so they'd fall. 1A's Todoroki, busting through and sabotaging the others in one move. This guy's cold. Present Mike called out over the stadium. Unknown to Todoroki, Hallen had already slipped past the robots, unseen to everyone. The next people to get past the robots was Bakugo, followed by Sero and Takoyami. Several others, mostly from Class 1A, followed behind them, finding one way or another past the robots. The current leaders of the pack are overwhelmingly from Class A. Present Mike called. Class A knows there's no time to hesitate. They've been exposed to the outside world, up close and personal. They've had that fear planted in them and they've endured it. Each has grown from that experience and forgotten how to hesitate. Aizawa added in. Down in the course, Midoriya was dodging attacks from the robots when he spotted an armor plate that had been knocked free of one of the robots. Todoroki froze. Thinking he could make use of it, Midoriya grabbed it, using it as a weapon so he wouldn't have to use his quirk so early on. Midoriya took down one of the robots. Sure that he could keep this up, Midoriya worked his way through. The next obstacle, though, was a little more difficult. So the first barrier was a piece of cake. How about the second? Fall and you're out. You gotta crawl across if you want to make it. This is the fall. Present Mike announced, before the students stretched a wide ravine with pillars spread throughout. Each of the pillars were connected by ropes. For some, like Asui, it was an easy enough task. For others, like Todoroki and Iida, it was all a matter of balance. And then there was Bakugo, who flew over the whole thing with the use of his quirk. Uraraka and Mina stood there for a moment, watching. Hearing fast approaching footsteps behind them, the two turned, only for a gust of wind to hit them. They didn't see anyone or anything that could have caused it, only footprints in the sand that came to a stop just short of them. What was that? Mina asked. No idea, Uraraka replied. The two turned back to the challenge at hand, refusing to be left behind. The leads keep breaking ahead, while the rest of the pack is bunched up. Our racers don't know how many will get to move on, so all they can do is aim for first place. And our leader has reached the final barrier. That is to say, this minefield. It's a deadly Afghan carpet. A quick glance is enough to reveal the mine's locations, so keep both eyes open and watch your step. I should mention ... our mines don't pack a deadly punch, but they're loud and flashy enough that you might need a change of underwear when it's all over, Present Mike announced. While Todoroki and Bakugo had begun to pick their way through the minefield, Midoriya was only halfway through the second obstacle, the armor plate from the robot, weighting him down. They've already made it that far. Quickly, gotta keep moving, Midoriya said, encouraging himself as he tried to move himself down across the ropes of the second barrier. Up ahead of him, Todoroki was trying to pick his way across the minefield, trying to set off as few of the mines as he possibly could. It didn't take much for him to figure out that the ones in the lead were the ones most at a disadvantage. He would have to take it slow. He had no sooner thought this when a familiar voice reached his ears, making him look back. Haha, this crap can't slow me down. With this yell, Bakugo flew past Todoroki. Your declaration of war was to the wrong person. It became a fight for first from there, Bakugo and Todoroki fighting to keep the lead. As they fought to take the lead from the other, Midoriya was reaching the beginning of the minefield, the piece of the robot's armor still under one arm. Midoriya's eyes flew around the field, working quickly to try to figure out a way to get past the minefield and up to the front. It was then that an idea hit him. On their own, the mines were little more than an annoyance meant to knock the students off balance. But if one put several of them together, the explosion would become bigger and flashier. So that's what Midoriya did. The explosion that rocked the minefield had everyone turning to see what had caused it, only to find Midoriya riding the robot armor piece, flying through the air, rushing towards the finish line. In just a moment, Midoriya flew past Bakugo and Todoroki, quickly approaching the ground. Both Bakugo and Todoroki increased their efforts to take back first. Todoroki knew it would create a path that the other students could then use, but he used his ice to coat the ground anyway. Just as Midoriya was starting to approach the ground, Todoroki and Bakugo started to pass them, but Midoriya wasn't done, twisting his body while grabbing a handful of cables that were sticking out of the armor piece. He swung with all his might, banging the armor piece against the ground and setting off more mines. The resulting explosion blew Todoroki and Bakugo off to the side while sending Midoriya rocketing forward. Midoriya hit the ground in a roll and popped back to his feet, sprinting off to take first place. Behind him, Todoroki and Bakugo continued to fight for second. They were just nearing the opening of the tunnel that would lead back into the arena when the smoke behind them suddenly split to make way for the last person they expected to see. A foot landed on each of their shoulders. As if in slow motion, the two boys looked up, only catching a glimpse of something blue before whoever it was jumped, using them as a springboard to launch them forward. Hands tapped the ground, flipping the person over as they twisted their body in midair, allowing them to land on their feet, now running backwards. Todoroki and Bakugo stared, wide-eyed, as they were confronted with who had just upstaged them. Grinning back at them, her hair flying around her as she kicked off the ground to launch herself backwards and closer to the finish line, was Howlin. Up until that very moment, they had both completely forgotten about Howlin and her agility and speed. But how had she caught up with them? Neither had seen hide or hair of her since the race had started. But, then again, they hadn't really been looking for her. For all they knew, she could have been just steps behind them the whole time, laying low and buying time. When Howlin knew she had both of their attention, her grin grew and she gave them a wink. Kicking off the ground once more, she twisted again until she was now facing forward. As she landed on her feet once more, she bent her knees further and, with a single shake of her tail, rocketed forward, gaining speed enough to pull ahead of them. Given their shock and her sudden burst of speed, as well as the short amount of distance between her and the finish line, they weren't going to catch up to her. Not in time to pull ahead of her. Todoroki had to admit she had chosen the perfect time to revel herself and pull ahead. Howlin gave a little bounce and a cheer of glee when she passed the finish line in second place, her smile bright and her tail flicking happily. Cheers erupted from the crowd as Howlin gave another bounce of glee. Coming out of nowhere in a surprise upheaval, second place is taken by Leander Howen of Class 1A. How's that for one sly kitty? Present Mike announced. I didn't see her at all through the whole race. Leander's strong point in her slyness and speed. If she wants to go unnoticed, she generally does. Aizawa added. Down below, Bakugo and Todoroki crossed the finish line, more students spilling in after them. Todoroki glanced over at Howlin as he paused to catch his breath. Instead of looking winded like the rest of them, Howlin looked refreshed, like the race had given her a little extra pep in her step. Todoroki really couldn't help but wonder how she had escaped his notice the whole race, how she had escaped everyone's notice. As if feeling his eyes on her, Howlin turned, blinking her big eyes at him in questioning before she smiled at him and gave him a little wave. It wasn't for the genuine smile on her face. He might have said she was mocking him, but that just wasn't Howlin. Racers crossed the finish line one after the other. We'll go over the standings later, so catch your breath for now. Present Mike called. Deku. Midoriya looked up as Uraraka ran towards him, calling him. That was awesome. Behind her, Iida was lamenting over the fact that he, with his quirk, had actually lost a race. He just couldn't seem to wrap his head around it and came to the conclusion that he still had progress he needed to make. First place, though. Man, I'm jealous, Uraraka told Midoriya. In embarrassment, Midoriya twisted his arms around himself, half burying his face in one bicep. While he had managed to take first, he knew it was all luck. He knew that from there on out was where real skill would take over. Skill ... and slyness, like Howlin's. Midoriya turned to look at Howlin as she stretched her body in order to avoid it cramping up on her. She had a big smile on her face as she hummed to herself. He had passed several people in all of the classes on his way to the front of the pack, but he didn't remember seeing Howlin even once. Past the initial rush out of the gate at the start, he had lost sight of her. Had it been her quirk at work? Before Midoriya could work himself up into a muttering fit again, Midnight came out to announce the standings. On the screen appeared their ranks. Of course, in first place was Midoriya, followed by Howlin, Todoroki, Bakugo, Shizaki from Class B, Honuki from Class B, Iida, Takoyami, Sero, and Kirishima finished out the top 10. In total, only 42 students passed to the next round of the festival. The top 42 from this qualifying round will move on, Midnight announced. But for those who placed lower, don't worry. We've got another way for you to show your stuff. And now the main selection really begins. The press corp's going to be jumping out of their seats. So give it all you've got. Now, on to the second event. I already know what it is, of course. Dying in suspense. Next up is ... this. The screen behind Midnight displayed the next event as Cavalry Battle. So we're teaming up, but how exactly? Asui asked. Participants will, on their own, form teams of 2 to 4 members each and get into a horse and rider formation. Midnight announced. Oh, so kind of like playing chicken in a pool. Howlin remarked to herself from where she stood between Mina and Toru. Kind of, Mina replied. While the idea was intriguing, Howlin figured there had to be a lot of problems that could arise from this, the forefront being that there would be more than just one opposing team to concern herself with. The rules are fundamentally the same as those of an ordinary cavalry battle. Snag your opponent's headbands while guarding your own. But with one exception. Each of you has been assigned a point value based on your ranking in the last event. Midnight explained. We'll earn points like in the entrance exam. Sounds simple, Sato remarked. So the point value of each team depends on its members. Toru added. Which means that all teams will be gunning for those who have more of the higher-ranked participants composing it. Howland added thoughtfully. I'm about to explain it, so just shut up already. Midnight snapped at them. Anyway, yes, and your individual point values start at 5, at the bottom. So the student who took 42nd place is worth 5 points. 41st is worth 10. Get it. But our first place participant is worth 10 million points. All eyes turned to Midoriya, who was now sweating in nervousness. Howland was kind of glad she hadn't taken first. She wasn't sure she could have stood being thrust so completely into the spotlight like that. The higher-ranked students are the ones to aim for. This survival game is a chance for a comeback. It's anyone's game. There's more suffering ahead for those at the top. As you must have heard countless times since enrolling at UA, this is plus ultra. Midnight told them. After taking first place in the qualifiers, Midoriya Izuku has got 10 million points. While, in second place, Howland was also a high target. She was nothing in comparison to Midoriya. All a team had to do was take his headband and keep it in order to win. It was a challenging position to be in and one with lots of pressure. But, on the other hand, if Midoriya managed to hold onto his headband, then it would be an automatic win for him. It got Howland to thinking. The match will last 15 minutes. Each team's points are determined by its members. The rider will wear a headband displaying the total number of points. Until the match ends, you'll all compete to grab each other's points and maintain the ones you have. Any headbands you grab must be worn around the neck or higher. But the more headbands you've got, the harder they'll be to manage. Most importantly, even if your headband is taken, and even if your horse formation is broken, it's not over till it's over. Midnight explained. With 42 contestants, there'll be 10 to 12 teams on the field the whole time. Sato asked, how tiresome? Aoyama remarked, perhaps, but also challenging. Howland piped in, so there's no need to panic if your points are temporarily stolen? Yeah. Mina asked, but you can't really tell if you're not paying attention to the minute-by-minute point breakdown? Mina, the Sui pointed out, by doing that, you put yourself and your team's points at risk and lose precious time. Howland added, Asui nodding in agreement. It would be a game that would test their ability to protect and fight at the same time while remaining hyper-vigilant at all times. A challenge for those among them who didn't do so well with prolonged fights. Quirks are allowed, so it'll be a brutal battle. However, it's still a cavalry battle. Maliciously attacking another team with the intent of making them fall will get you a red card. And that means you're out of the game. You've got 15 minutes. Time to form your teams. Midnight called. Mina instantly turned to ask Howland to team with her, but just as she had vanished during the first round, Howland was gone once more. Groaning in disappointment, Mina went on to her second choice while other students begun pairing off. Several of the other students from class went to Bakugo, hoping to team up with him. Midoriya found out, quick enough, that no one really wanted to team up with him for a couple of reasons. The foremost being his insane amount of points. He was starting to get so upset that when Uraraka approached him and asked to be on his team, he actually broke into tears. Why you mean it? Everyone's probably gonna come after me for my 10 million. Midoriya said. Yeah, but you'll win if you can just run away. Uraraka told him. I think you're overestimating me, Uraraka. That's fine. Who cares? Teaming up with a friend just seems right. Uraraka declaring, smiling brightly. Midoriya was so grateful to have a friend like her. It made his chest grow tight and also put a weird look on his face that had Uraraka questioning why his face suddenly went all ugly looking. I actually wanted to team up with you too, so thanks. Partnering with someone you get along with is definitely the best option. Now that we've got your quirk, Uraraka, we just need him. I've got the perfect plan, Midoriya said. The two went in search of Iida then, to recruit him to their team, only to find that he had already agreed to join Todoroki's team. The conversation ended with Iida also challenging Midoriya as Todoroki already had. Now what? Uraraka asked. Hey, Midoriya. Midoriya turned on the SPT, looking around for who had called him. He caught sight of Howland waving to him to come over. She was partly hiding behind an already formed group, as if she was trying to escape notice of those who hadn't yet found their team. Midoriya shared a look with Uraraka before the two hurried over to Howland. Let me join your team. The simple sentence was the first thing out of her mouth. Midoriya was so shocked that, for a moment, he just stared at her. He quickly snapped himself out of it when she raised an eyebrow at him. You sure? He asked. Yeah, I am. I can't tell you what my quirk is, because I'm trying to keep it a secret for a reason, but I can assure you that I can get you out of a few tough places if you need it. I'm your friend and friends support each other through thick and thin. Howland told him. Midoriya thought for a moment. Despite not knowing that Hallen's quirk was, he knew for sure that she was fast, flexible, and good at fending off others with cleverness. He knew she wouldn't drag him down and he really could use someone with her slyness. He looked up at Hallen, seeing the serious and determined look on her face. "All right," he agreed. Hallen smiled, her tail curling happily behind her. While losing Iida was bad, he now had Uraraka and Hallen. Just one more now, Midoriya mused. He turned to scan those who still hadn't joined a team. Uraraka and Hallen standing at his side. Many were already gathered with their teams, planning ahead. It was then that Midoriya's eyes landed on the perfect final member of their team. Hallen and Uraraka called out to him in questioning when Midoriya suddenly walked away from them. By passing several others, he approached Tokoyami, asking him to join their team. Thankfully, he did, coming back to Uraraka and Hallen with Midoriya in order for the four of them to plan out their approach to the game. Midoriya quickly went about explaining his plan to them. "Right, just focus on defending. There's no need for you to attack," Midoriya told Tokoyami. Interesting. The darker it is, the more ferocious my quirk attacks. But then the beast is hard to control. In daylight he's easier to manage but not much help in a fight. It's not like you knew, but picking me and my quirk for pure defense ... not a bad choice at all, I say. Tokoyami replied. "Use me as best you can. I trust you, Midoriya." "A weakness to light," Hallen mused lowly. "Sounds about right for a quirk like yours. And you, what of your quirk?" Tokoyami asked. "I'm still not telling. Believe me, not knowing is to your benefit as well. If you don't know what's coming, then the others can never guess. And keeping it a secret makes it easier for me to help us as a team," Hallen reasoned. After all, they didn't know what quirks the other students had. "Your 15 minutes are up. Time to get started." Midnight suddenly called out. Each team was handed the headband with their combined score on it. Midoriya took theirs since he would be the horse, and secured it around his head. Once secure, they formed their horse, Midoriya acting as the horse while Uraraka and Hallen took the back flanks and Tokoyami took the front. "Uraraka," Midoriya called, silently asking if she was ready. "Yep," Uraraka answered. "Leander, ready when you are," Hallen replied. Tokoyami, "Yeah," Tokoyami replied. "Let's do this," Midoriya called. All of them braced themselves for the upcoming battle. They were pretty sure that once the battle started, most teams would be gunning for them and their over 10 million points. Formed your teams, made your plans. Too bad if you haven't. Here we go. The countdown to this brutal royal. 3, 2, 1, start. With President Mike's call to start the battle, several teams, just as Hallen had thought, came right for her team. Incoming attacks right off the bat. "There are 2 teams," Tokoyami called back. "The fate of those who are pursued ... Make your choice, Midoriya." "Run away, of course," Midoriya replied. Hallen, Uraraka, and Tokoyami, trying to move together, turned to carry Midoriya away but found their feet sinking in quicksand, gluing them to the spot. Try as they might to free their feet, they wouldn't budge. "We're sinking." "Guess that's his quirk," Midoriya said. "Ugh, how do we get free?" Uraraka demanded. Hallen's head whipped from side to side, trying to find an out. Finally, she clicked her tongue. "Midoriya, shift your weight off my left arm," she called. Midoriya shifted forward, bracing his hands on Tokoyami's shoulders. He felt Hallen's arm that was supporting him as a seat vanish. "Achako, get ready to float us." Hallen shifted downward, plunging her left hand into the sand. Midoriya, Tokoyami, and Uraraka didn't see what Hallen did, but in the next second, they were being rocketed into the sky. The 2 approaching teams stared up at them as they flew up into the air. Gyro tried to attack with her earphones, but Dark Shadow fended her off. "Well done, Dark Shadow. Be sure to cover our blind spots," Tokoyami told his quirk. "Gotcha," Dark Shadow replied. "Wow, that was awesome. Just the defensive power we were lacking. But now we're covered at mid-range from every direction." "Good going, Tokoyami," Midoriya praised. "You're the one who chose me," Tokoyami replied. "But, Leander, what did you do?" Midoriya asked, looking back at her. "Don't worry about it too much. I told you I could get us in the air," Hallen replied, bracing her arm under him once more so he could take his weight off Tokoyami's shoulders. "We're landing. Ha-chan, brace yourself," Uraraka called, shifting so that all the weight would land on Hallen and Uraraka first. They touched down, both girls bending their knees to land on their feet. Uraraka released her quirk on Tokoyami last, so that he touched down after them. Midoriya was impressed with the pair the 2 girls made. While Uraraka was working her quirk on everything but herself and their clothes, Hallen was acting like a directional system, getting them in the air and coordinating with Uraraka in order to change their direction. Add in the mid-range defenses of Tokoyami and the close-range defense from Hallen, who was flexible enough to work her way around Uraraka and Tokoyami, and they were doing great. As Tetsutetsu's team came at them from the right, Dark Shadow fighting them off, Shoji came charging in from the right. "Huh, Shoji's alone. But this is a cavalry battle," Midoriya exclaimed. We must keep our distance. Fighting multiple foes is a bad idea. Then we need to move. Ochako, this way, Hallen called, moving to one side. She didn't get far before Uraraka pulled them up short. Hallen twisted to look at the other girl in questioning. Ochako, she asked. I'm stuck. Uraraka replied, looking down to where her shoe was stuck to the ground with one of Minta's balls. That's Minta's. But where is he? Midoriya asked, looking around. And here, Midoriya. Minta called from where he was hiding under the protective barrier that Shoji's was creating with his tentacles. Well, is that legal? Midoriya asked. Hallen didn't have time to care. She was forced to compensate for balance when Midoriya had to duck to dodge Asui's tongue as it shot out of Minta's hiding space as well. With Midoriya's quick response, the tongue flew past him and nearly smacked Tetsu in the face. Asui too. How many you got in there, Shoji? Midoriya questioned. Worry about that later. We need to focus on retreating. Hallen told him. Right. Midoriya agreed. Ochako, sorry, but you're going to have to lose a shoe. Hallen added. In a feat of great balance, Hallen managed to balance her weight and the part of Midoriya's weight she was bearing on one foot. With the other foot, she reached out, stepping on the back of Uraraka's shoe so that her foot could pop right out. Once it was free, she shifted again. Once again, her teammates weren't able to see what she did. But in the next moment, they were launched into the air once again. Sorry about your shoe, Ochako, Hallen told her friend. Don't worry about it. We managed to get away and that's what matters, Uraraka assured her. Their escape, though, wasn't as clean as they thought. Midoriya and Hallen were the first to spot him as Bakugo came flying at them, using his quirk to propel him through the air. Getting pretty full of yourself, huh, you bastard, Bakugo yelled, a huge grin on his face. Takoyami, Midoriya called. Dark Shadow reacted quickly, acting as a barrier between Bakugo and their team. Blocked, Bakugo was left to fall back toward the ground, Sero using his quirk to pull Bakugo back to them. All of the crowd was fixed on the students of Class A, watching as they both attacked and defended. But, despite having real experience fighting villains, it wasn't Class A that was dominating the point board, but the students of Class B. Several teams had already lost their headbands. Even Bakugo's team had already lost theirs. It turned out that Class B, from the very start, had gone into the festival with the plan to throw the qualifier in order to make a big impact in the following rounds. They had played the long game, a good strategy, but not one that worked for everyone. It also meant that they wouldn't be aiming for Midoriya. That was good since it meant less opponents for them to have to worry about. Guys, I think it won't be too hard to evade Midoriya cut off as another team cut off their path. Or maybe it won't be quite that easy. Before them was Todoroki's team. Well, hello barrier, Hallen muttered lowly. Midoriya, what do we do? Looks like this won't end without a fight. They're really gunning for you, Midoriya, Takoyami added. We're halfway through, so we've got to keep moving. But there are multiple teams incoming, Midoriya warned. Hallen had to shield her eyes as the approaching teams that were coming in on Todoroki's back were taken down by Kaminari's electricity, Dark Shadow defending her teams from damage. To follow up Kaminari's attack, Todoroki took a pole produced by Yaoyorozu, using it to run his ice into the ground, freezing in place those teams affected by Kaminari's attack. After so many people had managed to make it past his ice during the obstacle course, Hallen wasn't surprised to see he had adjusted the attack by using Kaminari's quirk first. It was a clever plan, especially since Todoroki was then able to snatch a couple of headbands. Leander, Midoriya called back to her. Hallen shifted in order to get them off the ground, going to move her right foot, only to find it frozen to the ground. When in the world had Todoroki managed that? My foot, it's frozen, she called. I can get it free, but not before they reach us. Midoriya looked down at Hallen in surprise. The ice was nearly completely coating her foot. How had she not felt the coldness of it on her foot? They're too strong. We'll never get away, Uraraka exclaimed, helping to support Midoriya weight as Hallen bent to quickly start chopping away at the ice around her foot. I'll create a diversion. Leander, hurry, Takoyami called. Right, Hallen didn't need to be told twice. She quickly went to work on the ice while Dark Shadow tried to fend off Todoroki's team, only to be stopped by Yaoyorozu. Her creation Quirk. What a pain, Midoriya remarked. No, Kaminari's the real problem. His sunlight attack would have wrecked my armor, Takoyami replied, referring back to Dark Shadow's weakness. Right, Kaminari's electricity, Midoriya said. As long as he keeps that up, I don't have a shot. This little guy's so fickle, Takoyami said. So you have less offensive power now, but they don't know that, right? Midoriya asked. Probably. The only one I ever told about my weakness is Kuchida, back at the USJ. But he doesn't talk much, Takoyami answered. As long as they don't know we can fake them out, we'll be fine. And the 10 million points will stay with us. Leander, how are you doing? Midoriya asked. I'm free, Hallen replied, but it wasn't going to do much to help them. Todoroki had them completely surrounded by ice, and with only a minute left on the clock, it was a bad position to be in, but they managed to, for the most part, avoid Todoroki's team. To top it off, they got to show off the flexibility of Howlin, dodging Todoroki's team so that it put Yaoyorozu face to face with Howlin. Yaoyorozu got a shock when she moved to try to attack and make an opening for Todoroki. She had no sooner created a weapon when Howlin gave a hop, calling to Uraraka to support Midoriya. Using Takoyami's shoulder as support, Howlin swung her body out, kicking aside the weapon. No sooner as Howlin's foot touched the ground, she twisted her body, reversing the kick to force Yaoyorozu back away from her team. Another kick off the ground and Howlin swung herself back into position. "That was awesome, Ha-chan," Uraraka praised. "I was only able to achieve it because of you and Takoyami," Howlin told her honestly. "But right now, we need to focus." Keeping to Midoriya's strategy, they stuck to Todoroki's left, moving that way whenever they moved towards them. They were doing well, that is, until Iida revealed his secret technique. The burst of speed was so great that even Howlin's eyes had a hard time trying to keep up. All she knew was one moment, they were in front of her team, in the next, a gust of wind almost knocked her off her feet. In that burst of speed, Todoroki was finally able to snatch the headband from Midoriya's head. "Iida, what was that just now?" Todoroki asked, as he secured the headband around his neck. "I elevated my torque and RPM to an explosive degree. The kickback stalls my engines temporarily, though. It's a secret technique that I haven't shown anyone yet," Iida replied, fixing his eyes on Midoriya. "As I said earlier, Midoriya, I'm challenging you." "Midoriya, time's running out," Howlin reminded a stunned Midoriya. "All right, charge them," Midoriya ordered. "I can't attack as long as Kaminari's there. Going after someone else's points is our best bet," Takoyami warned. "No good. Can't you see the difference in points? This is our only option," Midoriya replied. "Then let's go for it already," Howlin said, already supporting Midoriya, Uraraka agreeing with her. "We're getting it back, Deku." "No doubt, Ha-chan." The two surged forward and shoved Takoyami into movement, determined looks set on their faces. Catching on to their pace, Takoyami sped up, setting his resolve. Midoriya looked down at them in surprise. In his head, each of their words played over in his head. Uraraka as she told him why she wanted to be a hero, Takoyami's as he put his trust in Midoriya, and Howlin's as she told him she would support him as a friend through thick and thin. Watching them put their all into following him, he realized that winning wouldn't just be for him. It would be for him and for those who had put their faith in him. With that reinforcing his drive, he took the speed his teammates offered and lunged for Todoroki. Howlin was pretty sure that she, having looked up to catch sight of the two's faces, was the only one outside the two that saw and felt what came over the two. Midoriya's drive, his determination was only second to All Might's, and that had Todoroki reacting out of instinct. His left arm coming up, flames already springing forth. Midoriya, not wanting to hit Todoroki, used the power of his quirk to create a slice of wind that sent Todoroki's left arm flying off to the side, opening a way for Midoriya directly to Todoroki's headbands. Todoroki, in that moment, realized what he had done, using his left side after he said he wouldn't. Stunned, he didn't block Midoriya. Midoriya grabbed one as they flew past. "I got it. I really got it," Midoriya cheered. It was then that Howlin's eyes landed on the amount of points on the headband. "Midoriya, it's the wrong one," she called. Midoriya looked down at the headband, finding it was a 70-point headband instead of the 10 million they had been aiming for. "We switched the headbands around just in case." "To naive, Midoriya," Yaoyorozu called back. With 10 seconds left, Midoriya ordered their team to charge once more, but they weren't the only ones. Bakugo came flying into the scene, but before any of them could reach their marks, time's up was called and the game was called to an end. Howlin and Uraraka helped a depressed Midoriya down. Let's see who the top 4 teams are right now. In first place, Team Todoroki. In second, Team Bakugo. In third, Team Tetsu ... Whoa, Team Shinso, who saw that turnaround coming, who even saw it happen. Present Mike announced. Midoriya was so depressed that he was all slumped over. Howlin hated to see him that way. After sharing a look with Uraraka, the two smiled. "Deku," Uraraka called. I'm so sorry." "Really?" Midoriya told them. He stared at the two girls as Uraraka and Howlin shared another look, the two grinning. Moving at the same time, they pointed past themselves and towards Takoyami, confusing Midoriya for a moment. "Todoroki was clearly shaken by your first attack. I did my best to nab the 10 million, but I came up short. But I got another one," Takoyami said, jabbing a thumb towards Dark Shadow, who had a headband worth 615 points caught in his mouth. "I managed to get another one when he dropped his guard." "Midoriya, the last-ditch effort of yours left Todoroki open." With tears in his eyes, Midoriya fell to his knees as the last team to pass the second round was called. In fourth, Team Midoriya. These 4 teams will proceed to the final event. Howlin laughed as she watched Midoriya sob his heart out. It had been a close call, a very close one, but in the end, it had turned out for the best. Now she had to prepare herself for what came next. We'll proceed to the afternoon portion after a 1-hour lunch break. See you then. When lunch was called, Todoroki called out Midoriya, leading the other away before their classmates knew what had happened. They found an out-of-the-way corridor where they could talk uninterrupted. For a long moment, though, they just stood across from each other, Todoroki staring at an uncomfortable Midoriya. You wanted to talk. About what? Midoriya asked, trying to get Todoroki to talk. The dining hall will be packed if we don't hurry. Still Todoroki continued to stare at him, making him shift in discomfort. Finally, blessedly, Todoroki spoke. You overwhelmed me, so much so that I broke my own pledge. Iida, Kaminari, Yaoyorozu, Tokoyami, Uraraka, Leander. None of them felt it. In that last instant, I was the only one feeling the pressure. I experienced All Might's true power up close, remember? Todoroki said. So, what are you saying? Midoriya asked. I felt the same pressure coming from you. So, are you All Might's illegitimate child or something? Todoroki asked bluntly. To say that Midoriya was stunned was an understatement. All he could do for a long pause was stare at Todoroki in a dumbfounded way. He had no doubt that if certain members of their class, like Howen, had heard that, they would be rolling on the floor in laughter. Finally, Midoriya started shaking his head rapidly. Nah, I'm denying that. But obviously, if I really were his kid, I'd try to deny it. So I realize I don't sound very convincing here. But no, that's not it. Midoriya tried to explain. So let me ask you then. Why would you think that No, that's not it. Interesting way to phrase it. There's definitely something you're hiding. I'm sure of it. You know, my father is Endeavor, the second greatest hero of all time. So if you're somehow connected to the #1 guy, then all the more reason for me to crush you. My dad. He's a powerful bastard who only thinks of becoming stronger. Yeah, he's gone all out to make a name for himself as a hero, but he's always seen that living legend, All Might, as a roadblock and an eyesore. My father could never beat All Might on his own, so he came up with another plan. Todoroki said. What's this about, Todoroki? Why are you telling me this? Midoriya asked. Quirk marriages. You've heard of them, yeah? They started becoming a problem during the second or third generation after quirks appeared. Strong individuals would choose a partner and force them into marriage for the sole purpose of passing on a strengthened version of their own quirk. Those earlier generations were lacking in ethics. With his wealth and fame, my father made my mother's family agree to the marriage, all to get his hands on her quirk, raising me as a hero who could exceed All Might, just to fulfill his own ambitions. I hate it, being no more than a tool for that human garbage. As I remember it, Mom was always crying. I can't stand to see that left side of yours, she said, before throwing scalding water in my face. Midoriya felt a shudder run down his spine as he stared, wide-eyed, at Todoroki. Absently, Todoroki's hand came up to touch the scarred left side of his face. Midoriya couldn't imagine what it must take for a mother to do such a thing to her own child. Unknown to them, just outside the hallway, Howen was leaning against the building, listening into the conversation. She had merely been looking for Midoriya when she had come across the two. Hearing what Todoroki had just told Midoriya, Howen pressed a hand against her stomach, as if she was about to be sick. A few things about Todoroki suddenly made a lot of sense to her. In short, not using my left side against you was my revenge on him. Never using my rotten father's quirk. No, by rising to the top without using it, I'll have denied him everything. Todoroki finished. Outside, Howen shook her head. She could understand a bad relationship with a father. She could understand the feelings that came with wondering if that same father even loved her or if it had all been a lie with some kind of ulterior motive behind it. She really could understand it, but Todoroki was only going to end up hurting himself in the end with the way he was approaching it. All this anger, it wasn't good for him, and it hurt her knowing that he was this twisted up inside because of his father's actions. It made her heart ache for him. How a man could only see his son as a means to an end was beyond her. Then again, there could be more to it for Todoroki's father than she knew. She didn't know the whole story yet, and there was always two sides to a story. Not wanting to be caught listening in, Howen hurried away, but what she had just heard would stick with her through the rest of the festival, just as it would with Midoriya. 000-0. After lunch, it was right back to the festivities. Before we get to the final event, I've got good news for all those out of the running. This is still a sports festival, so we've prepared a recreational activity for all participants. We even shipped in cheerleaders from America to get you pumped up. Present Mike announced. Howen was suddenly glad that she hadn't been around the other girls in her class for lunch. Somehow, for some reason, all of the other girls in her class had been talked into wearing cheerleader outfits. Something about Iida and Kaminari tricking them. Howen kind of felt bad for the girls. How'd I let myself get fooled by Iida's stupid prank? Yaoyorozu asked herself. You really should take anything Iida tells you with a spoonful of suspicion. Howen told her as she and Uraraka patted her back. Those idiots, Gyro muttered, throwing down one of her pom-poms. Still time before the main event. No sense in sitting around. Toru reasoned. Why not just go with it? Could be fun. You're enjoying this, Toru, Isui remarked. Well, it is a good way to pass the time. Howlin admitted. Join us, Ha-chan, Toru suggested. Halen shook her head, a smile curling her lips. Sorry, but I'm going to use this time to mentally prepare myself for what comes next in the festival. Howlin told them. She was going to take the time to save up her energy and prepare herself for whatever the festival threw at her. But first, the announcement of the final event. The final event. One-on-one battles among the 16 passing students. A tournament, huh? So we'll be up in that ring I see on TV every year. Kirishima cheered. Was it a tournament last year too? Mina asked. The format's always different, but most years involve some kind of head-to-head competition. Last year it was foam sword fighting. Sero answered. It was amusing to watch, Howlin said, grin on her face. It was obvious, by the grin on her face and the amused way her tail curled, that she had enjoyed watching the tournament a little too much. The matchups will be decided by drawing lots, Midnight announced, holding up a box. Once that's settled, we'll move on to the festivities and then the tournament itself. It's up to each of you 16 finalists whether or not you participate in the fun. I expect some of you would rather take a breather and save your strength. Now, let's start with the first place team. Midnight was cut off when Ajiro suddenly raised his hand, calling attention to himself. Excuse me, I'd like to drop out, Ajiro announced. Ajiro, why? This is your chance to get noticed by the pros, Iida told him. The cavalry battle. I have no memories of anything that happened up until the tail end. It's probably his quirk that did it. I know this is a great opportunity, and I know how stupid it must seem to throw it away, but this final tournament, everyone else made it here by their own strength. Yet I'm standing here, and I don't even know how or why. I just can't take it. Ajiro explained. You're thinking about it too hard. Just show what you're made of in the tournament. Toru told him. By that logic, I shouldn't be here either. Mina added. No, I'm talking about my pride. Here, Ajiro said, pressing a hand to his face. I don't think it's right. And why the heck are you girls dressed like that anyway? Howlin laid a hand on Ajiro's shoulder, making him raise his head to look at her. She gave him a smile. I know how you feel. Everyone has their own morals and ethics. Don't let anyone sway you from yours, Howlin told him. Ajiro gave her a grateful smile. As it was, he wasn't the only one that felt like he didn't deserve to go on to the next event. A boy from Class B felt the same way. In the end, it was up to Midnight. How naive and green. I like it. Shota and Ajiro have officially withdrawn. Replacing those two will be members of Team Kendo, which took 5th. If it's gonna be like that, shouldn't it be them instead? I mean, we were immobilized practically the whole time. But they were giving it their all to keep what they had until the very end. Team Tetsu, I mean, don't worry, we're not colluding or anything. This just feels right, Kendo said, giving her classmate a smile. So be it. Tetsu and Shizaki bring us back up to 16 competitors. And here are the matchups, Midnight announced. Everyone turned to the screen as the matchups were displayed. Howlin's eyes followed the names sprawled across the bottom of the screen until she located her own name. The name connected to hers was Iida. Howlin turned to her classmate, meeting his eyes. For a moment it looked like she might be fighting with some morals about fighting a friend. But then her tail curled and grin curled her lips. Iida didn't like the look one bit. Good luck to you, Iida. May the best hero win, she told him. Her tone, though, suggested that she had some evil plan up her sleeve, just for him. Before he could say anything or even begin to approach the question of what her look meant, she turned and walked away. Her tail swaying happily behind her. She even hummed a happy little tune to herself as she walked away. What the hell was she planning? Not that he got his answer before they were being cleared off the field to make way for the side events. While some of the others took that time to psych themselves up for the upcoming tournament and others tried to relax, Howlin preferred to find a seat away from other to watch the little events until the tournament started. She had a lot to think about. Looking at the layout for the tournament, she was pretty sure that Midoriya and Todoroki would pass their first rounds. If she won her first 2 rounds, then that meant she would face one off with one of them. She wasn't exactly sure which she would prefer to face. After the extra events were over, Cementos got to work on building the ring they would use for the tournament. Howlin joined the rest of her class in a seating box set aside for their class only. Hey, guys, are you ready? You've been through hell to get here. But now it's time for the one-on-one tournament. You've only got yourself to rely on. Even if you're not a hero, this saying holds true. You know it. Spirit, technique, strength, wisdom, and knowledge. Use them all and show us your best. The first match, making a weird face despite his excellent performance, it's Midoriya Izuku from the hero course versus, sorry, but this guy hasn't really done anything to stand out yet. It's Shinso Hitoshi from General Studies. Present Mike announced. Down below, Midoriya and Shinso entered the ring to a round of cheers from those watching. Hallen was interested to see what kind of quirk this Shinso had and how Midoriya would handle himself in a one-on-one battle. The rules are simple. Win by knocking your opponent out of the ring, immobilizing them or getting them to say I give up. Bring the pain. We've got our good old recovery girl on standby. And fight dirty if you must. Ethics have no meaning here. Well, of course, going for the kill is a no-no. You'll be disqualified, because a true hero's fists fly only when in pursuit of villains. Now let's get this thing started. Hallen knew, almost instantly, that something was wrong when Midoriya yelled at Shinso for something he said and suddenly froze in place. From the look on Shinso's face, Hallen was pretty sure it was his quirk at work. Damn it, Midoriya. I warned you. Ajiro yelled from where he sat behind Hallen. So this is Shinso's quirk? Hallen asked, twisting to look at him. Yeah, Ajiro replied. Hallen turned her eyes back to the ring below. From the looks of it, it had to be some kind of mind control quirk. A rare type of quirk and one that could be very valuable. She was sure that was the case when, after a word from Shinso, Midoriya turned and started headed towards the out-of-bounds line of the ring. It looked like it was all over for Midoriya. That being said, Hallen was pleasantly surprised when Midoriya somehow managed to move just 2 fingers, setting off a blast from his own quirk which, in turn, snapped him out of Shinso's control. It broke 2 of his fingers, but it did the trick. Wow, not to go that far. Ajiro whispered. Sometimes you have to go that far. Hallen remarked, silently impressed with Midoriya. Shinso tried to jab Midoriya into answering him again, so he could gain control once more. Midoriya wasn't falling for it. Despite Shinso being bigger and taller, Midoriya rushed him, trying to push him out of the ring. Shinso punched him, trying to get him off of him, but Midoriya was too persistent, too stubborn to let this be the last of him. It took a little grappling, but with a well-placed throw, Midoriya was able to get part of Shinso out of the ring, even if it was only by a foot. Literally, Shinso is out of the ring. Midoriya moves on to the second round. Midnight called. Hallen, along with most of the crowd, clapped for Midoriya, a smile on her face. It was done with 2 broken fingers and a bleeding nose, but Midoriya had made his way past the first round. She had noticed it, watching him during battle training. But Midoriya really was like her in the fact that he learned, adapted from his experiences. Just thinking of the challenge he would present if she ever got to go up against him, made the fur on her tail stand on end. The next match was another quick one, Todoroki versus Sero. Midoriya joined the rest of the class just as the match was starting. The cream of the crop. Yet this guy's somehow still as plain as they come. Sero Hanta of the hero course versus the best of the best, strongest of the strong, Todoroki Shoto, also of the hero course. Start. Sero started out strong in Hallen's opinion. He quickly wrapped Todoroki up in his tape and, with a solid yank, sent him flying toward the out-of-bounds line. But Todoroki wasn't having it. Hallen's hair was blown back from her face in a burst as, with a single upswing of his hand, Todoroki created a massive wall of ice that easily stood taller than the arena. The ice actually came to a stop just mere inches from her face, making her blink at it in mild surprise before she leaned around it to peer down at the ring below. Sero was frozen in place, and since he couldn't move to continue the match, it was called in Todoroki's favor. As it was called that Todoroki would move on to the next round, Hallen caught sight of him as he defrosted himself and Sero. She didn't know if it was just her or not, but, in that moment, to her, Todoroki looked incredibly sad. To be honest, to see such a confident guy look so sad and even angry at the same time, it broke Hallen's heart. She couldn't bear to see anyone, especially not a classmate, hurt like that. She would have to do something, anything. She couldn't leave it like this. She simply didn't have it in her. After all the ice that Todoroki has covered the ring in, they had to take a break to thaw out the ice. Once that was done, the next match, featuring Kaminari and Shizaki, started. Since Hallen's match against Iida was right after that, she excused herself from her seat to head for the preparation room. The girls of her class called out good luck to her as she left. Later, she would find out that Shizaki beat Kaminari quickly and soundly because he had underestimated her. Hallen, waiting in the prep room to be called, hopped from one foot to the other, shaking her hands out as she rolled her shoulders. She was nervous, jittery even. Back in Italy, they didn't have huge events like this. They did, however, have a smaller event where students from all schools could come together and compete, but that had always been optional, and Hallen, favoring secrecy over fame, had never competed. She wasn't a big fan of the limelight. Here, though, she didn't have much of a choice. In order to make something of herself and reach a position where she could make her dream come true, she had to deal with the spotlight. So she would face Iida, she would fight to win, and would move on to the next round. For now, though, she would not be showcasing her quirk. Not quite yet. Finally, she was called to report to the ring. Hallen took a deep breath, steadied her nerves, plastered a smile on her face, and stalked into the ring with all the lethal grace of a feline with its eyes on its prey. Seeing the serious look on Ida's face, Her grin grew. He was nervous, she could tell, could practically smell it on him, and she was sure it was all over the fact that he didn't know what her quirk was and, therefore, didn't know what all she was capable of. The first round's just about half over. Next up is Iida Tenya of the Hero Course versus Our Lady of Mystery, whose quirk is unknown even to us of the staff. Leander Howen, also of the Hero Course. Howen could hear the surprised mutterings of the crowd when it was announced that even the teachers didn't know what her quirk was. None of them could believe that even her teachers didn't know what it was. What could she say? She was good at hiding things. May the best person win, right, Iida? Howen called. Yes, best of luck to you, Leander. Iida replied. Sorry, dear friend, but I don't need luck. Ida's eyebrow rose as Howen crouched on her spot, her tail lashing back and forth. She placed her hands on the ring floor, her backside rising into the air until her tail curled over her head. She braced herself in that position, waiting, her whole body freezing. Iida didn't think she was even breathing. Start. The word barely left Present Mike's mouth before Howen was moving, her whole body springing forward like a cat pouncing on its prey. Iida swore he even saw her fang-like teeth flash before he moved to get out of her way. Not that it did him any good. Howen had reflexes like that of a cat hunting for its next meal. Her hands connected with the ring floor, her lower body swinging around while her tail helped her to keep balance, and then she was pouncing again. Now expecting it, Iida moved out of her way, aiming a kick for her when she landed. Howen responded by bunching up the muscles in her legs and springing straight up in the air, the kick flying past right under her body. Her toes no sooner touched the ground before she jumped again, swing her own kick for his face. He had to admit, Howen had excellent reflexes, able to react to him just in the nick of time. But she was also taking advantage of the fact that when he used his speed, it was extremely difficult to change directions at the drop of a hat where she could twist and turn with ease, which he found out the hard way and in a rather irksome manner. Howen, with all the ease of a seasoned acrobat, flipped and twisted this way and that, avoiding Iida and effectively driving him up the wall when she would just crouch there, grin on her face and her tail giving a little mocking flick. It was as if the girl was just playing with him, but the truth was she was baiting him, something that those watching the match could see. When she finally pulled the switch on him, he didn't see it coming until it hit him across the face. Literally, he has just attacked again. Only for Howen to flip out of his way, landing on her hands. Balancing there, she twisted and slammed a booted heel across his face. Flipping back away from him, she landed in a crouch once more. Iida rubbed his abused cheek while the crowd hissed in sympathy. And Iida agreed. He hadn't realized just how much strength Howen had in her legs. Iida turned to Howen, who patiently waited for him, her tail curling one way and then the other. The moment his eyes were on her once again, she sprang. He avoided her, but she twisted once more and hit him again. As his world spun from the force of the hit, Iida realized that if he took too many of those hits to the face or head, then she was going to end up knocking him out. The process repeated itself, Howen wearing him down, while her energy seemed only to increase as she got into the swing of the match, bouncing from one spot to the next. Just when he thought he had her movements down, she mixed it up on him. Instead of dodging and then twisting to attack, she dodged and then jumped onto him. One of her hands hit him smack in the face, her knees pressing into his shoulders until her weight knocked him back off his feet. She rolled away from him when they hit the ground and popped back to her feet. Iida had to roll to the side to avoid her next pounce and was scrambling to his feet before she could hit again. But now, instead of being on the offensive, Howen had forced him into defense as she rapidly attacked him, forcing him further and further back. It was just a few feet short of the out-of-bounds line that he realized what Howen was doing and planted his feet, fending off her attacks with his arms. Howen noticed quickly and aimed a hard kick for his arms. When Iida blocked it, gritting his teeth when he was sure he felt some, at least, crack, she grabbed his wrist, using his firm stance in order to snake her way over his shoulder, taking a nosedive for the ring floor. Iida twisted, concerned she would smack her face on the ground, putting himself off balance, but Howen, as easily as she had with all of her other moves, caught herself on her hands. What she did next both shocked and dumbfounded Iida as well as those watching. If anyone was ever foolish enough to claim that Howen's lithe body didn't contain strength, they were in for a rude awakening. Howen, in a feat that displayed her flexibility, hooked her legs under his arms and, heaving with a strength Iida didn't know she possessed, she twisted her body, balancing on one arm so she could swing the other out, making his knees buckle when she hit the back of them, hard. Between her own strength and the momentum of his falling, Howen was able to retch him up off his feet and, with a snap of her body, send him fly up and over her. Iida, having lost his balance, landed in a heap. When he sat up, Howen, still balanced on one hand and looking at him from upside down, gave him a victory sign, her grin growing. It took him a moment to realize why. Iida is out of bounds. Leander moves on to round 2. Midnight called. Iida looked down to find that he had landed just out of bounds. Happy with her victory, Hallen flipped back onto her feet and threw her hands into the air in a cheer as she gave a joyful leap into the air. She spun on the spot once before bounding over to Iida, offering him a hand up and a smile. "That was great, Iida. You really are fast," Hallen complimented as she helped him up. "Not fast enough for you, apparently," he remarked in a rather bittersweet way. "Nonsense. I just took advantage of an obvious weakness to your speed. If it had been a race, you would have won, hands down," Hallen told him, giving his hand a shake in a show of sportsmanship. "And yet, during the obstacle course, you still beat me," Iida pointed out. "Yes, well, I had an unfair advantage in that, too," she admitted. Before Iida could question her on what she meant, she spun away from him and headed out of the ring, making way for the next match. Iida really didn't have any idea on how to handle Hallen sometimes. She just bounced from one thing to the other, but he would admit that she was a very clever fighter. She had taken advantage of the weakness to his speed as well as his concern for a classmate. She was a very clever person, indeed. "Congrats, Hallen." Hallen was greeted with cheers of congrats from the females of her class. Hallen gave them a smile in response, claiming her seat once more. The next match was between Aoyama and Mina, with Mina taking home the win with a solid uppercut. After them was Yaoyorozu vs Tokoyami. Despite how well she normally did in class, Yaoyorozu lost and rather quickly. The match after that proved to be one that would take a while to conclude, Kirishima vs Tetsu. Hallen couldn't help grinning at just how similar the two were, right down to their personalities and quirks. With the two of them, it was more of a battle to see which one would knock out the other first. Aloha left Hallen's lips when the two actually ended up knocking each other out at the same time. Since the two were both out, Midnight declared that they would decide the outcome when the two regained conscious. Until then, they were moving on with the next match. Hallen sat forward in her seat as the next two contestants came out. This was going to be a match that was going to be a little painful to watch. "In some ways, I'm most worried about this next one," Hisui remarked. "Honestly, I don't want to watch." Gyro added, "Watch." All eyes turned to Hallen. "Don't take your eyes off the match. Achako is strong in her own way and will fight with all she has. In honor of that, don't take your eyes off them. Where I come from, that is how you honor a true warrior." Though they all feared for Uraraka, simply because they knew how Bakugo could be, they would watch closely. For all they knew, a miracle could happen and Uraraka could beat Bakugo soundly. For the last matchup of the first round, a celebrity since his middle school days, with a face only a mother could love. It's Bakugo Katsuki of the Hero Course versus my personal pick, Uraraka Achako, also of the Hero Course. Present Mike announced. Hallen fixed her eyes on the ring below, her ears picking up the conversation of Iida and Midoriya next to her. "You said earlier you thought of a counter-strategy for her against Bakugo. What was it?" Iida asked Midoriya. "Oh, nothing special, really. Ka-chan is strong. He's got virtually no weaknesses in close-range combat. His quirk's stronger the more mobile he is. He can maneuver in midair, but if she can get him floating, she'll gain the advantage," Midoriya said. "But for Akako to float him, she has to get close, which is where he really shines." Hallen mused lowly. "Exactly," Midoriya said. Below, the match was called to a start. As soon as the start was called, Uraraka, keeping close to the ground, charged Bakugo. Her determination was clear in the expression she had set on her face. Even just by accidentally touching him, she can send him floating, so he'll want to keep his distance. "And if I know Ka-chan, he won't dodge, but confront her," Hallen supplied, finishing Midoriya's sentence for him. "Yeah," Midoriya confirmed. Hallen watched as, down below, Bakugo, as he always did, lead with a right hook, the explosion rocking the ring. Uraraka, despite knowing it was coming, couldn't react in time to dodge it and took the explosion nearly head-on. But what Uraraka did next showed just how clever the girl could be in a pressing situation. Bakugo waited, staring into the settling smoke intently. When he caught sight of Uraraka's gym jacket, he attacked. His mistake was, though, underestimating Uraraka. He figured it out quick when he hit the jacket to find that the girl wasn't inside it. Taking a chance at his exposed back, Uraraka appeared out of his smoke behind him. She almost had him when he caught on and swung an arm back, an explosion sending her flying back off her feet. Hallen hissed lowly as Uraraka caught herself, sliding across the ring floor, despite the smoke screen covering her movements. Bakugo had a reaction time that was crazy fast. Only Hallen's reaction time topped his. Uraraka was at a severe disadvantage against Bakugo. Not only did she have to touch him in order for her quirk to work, she was slower than Bakugo. It was a tough matchup, but Uraraka wasn't giving up. She grit her teeth and went charging back in. Bakugo met her head-on. Uraraka took the hit and came back for more. Many of Hallen's classmates were horrified, some unable to watch. Hallen, though, saw something they didn't. Her tail curled up over her shoulder and gave a flick. "So that's her plan," Hallen said in enlightenment, some of the others looking at her. "Clever girl, Achako, very clever." "What is it?" Kaminari asked. "If you can't see it, you will," was Hallen's simple reply. Though Howland didn't see how they couldn't see it. They weren't the only ones either. Pros in the crowds begun to boo Bakugo, calling out cries of disapproval of Bakugo's actions. They were silenced when Aizawa spoke over the speakers. Is the one who said he's toying with her a pro? How many years of active duty? If that's what you're taking away from this, then you can leave. No point in watching. Go home and start looking at job hunting sites. She's come this far, and he knows her strength. His caution shows that he recognizes her as a worthy opponent. It's exactly because he wants to win so badly that there's no room for carelessness or holding back, Aizawa declared, and Howland agreed completely, especially when Uraraka unveiled her true plan. By dropping all the rubble from Bakugo's attacks right on his head. Howland could understand Bakugo, who was on ground level with Uraraka, not to notice, but for the pros up in the stands not to notice. Now that was just bad. In fact, it was right down embarrassing. Uraraka, the little genius, had, by charging in low, kept Bakugo's attention on the ground, his attacks kicking up a lot of rubble that she then used as her weapons against him. In short, she created her own personal meteor storm. It was a self-sacrificing strategy, one Howland could respect, but it just wasn't enough. In a huge explosion that sent shock waves up into the stands, Bakugo completely cleared out the falling rubble. Despite having her last resort blown away, Uraraka got back to her feet to charge in once more, but her body had other plans. Uraraka wobbled on her feet before falling to the ground. Midnight stepped in then, checking on Uraraka, but it was clear, even to those in the stands, that she was down for the count. Uraraka is unable to continue. Bakugo moves on to the second round. Midnight announced. Uraraka was carted off to Recovery Girl, and it was announced that the next round would begin after a short break. Since the first match of the next round would be Midoriya versus Todoroki, Midoriya left for the prep room. It wasn't long after that Bakugo returned. Oh, rough match, huh, villain face, Sero asked. Awkward matchups aside, you do great at playing the bad guy, Bakugo. Asui added. Shut the hell up, all of you, Bakugo snapped. Don't blame us because you almost bit off more than you could chew, Howland remarked. Isn't that right, Ka-chan? Bakugo grit his teeth, one eye twitching as he glared at Howland. Howland grinned back up at him, her tail curling in a teasing manner. No, really though, nice job blowing up that frail little girl, Kaminari remarked. Not like me, I held back against mine. You were beaten fair and square, Kaminari, Asui and Howland said together. Oh come on, you two, Kaminari complained. Bakugo ignored them all as he dropped into an empty seat, his arms crossed. Nothing frail about her, Bakugo retorted. Aw, aren't you a cool customer, Ka-chan? Howland teased, getting out of her seat and draping an arm around his shoulders. Get the hell off, he snapped, swatting at her. Howland brushed his hand off to the side as she danced out of his reach, laughing. She gave his head a pat as she hurried past him, excusing herself to go check on Uraraka. She reached the prep room just as it was decided through an arm wrestling match that Kirishima would move on to the next round. Ha-chan, Uraraka called in surprise when Howland opened the door. That was an awesome job, Ochako, Howland said, rushing inside to hug her friend. Uraraka gladly took the hug. Howland gave her a squeeze before holding her out in front of her, a huge smile on her face. You truly were amazing. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. Thanks, but I still lost, Uraraka told her. But that just means you can learn from this experience and grow more. Don't put yourself down just yet, Ochako. You still have a lot of fight in you, Howland assured her. Uraraka, grateful for her friend, gave her a smile. Howland gave her hands a squeeze before turning to Midoriya. And you, good luck out there, Howland told him, giving his shoulder a supportive clap. Oh, right. Sorry, you wasted all your prep time talking to me, Uraraka said, apologizing to Midoriya. Good luck out there. I'm rooting for ya. Midoriya thanked the both of them and left to report to his match. Once he was gone, Howland turned to her friend. She gave Uraraka's shoulder a squeeze. You take your time, all right. I'll head on back ahead of you and assure the others that you're fine, Howland told her. Thank, Ha-chan. You're the best, Uraraka told her, Howland shaking her head in response. I know I would want to talk to my family in a time like this. That or be alone for a while. You just take your time. I'll see you in a while, Howland told her. Howland gave her a smile and a wave and headed back to the others. She rejoined her class just as Todoroki and Midoriya entered the ring. After assuring her friends that Uraraka was fine, she turned to fix her eyes on the two boys below. Both of these competitors have won top marks in this festival so far, but there's only room for one of these greats in the ring. It's Midoriya versus Todoroki. Start. The moment the match started, Todoroki attacked with his flashiest move, ice rocketing across the ring towards Midoriya, who answered in kind, blowing the ice away while sacrificing one of his fingers. Todoroki tried the same attack, twice more, and only got the same result, again and again. It was then that Kirishima showed back up. Gah, they already started, Kirishima complained. "Hey, nice job getting to the second round, Kirishima," Kaminari called. "Thanks, I'm up against you next, Bakugo," Kirishima called. "I'll kill you," was Bakugo's simple reply. "Hahaha, I'd like to see you try," Kirishima told him with a laugh before moving on. "But man, you and that Todoroki. You can fire off as many of those crazy strong attacks as you want. As many as we want. Don't be an idiot," Bakugo told him. "Huh," Kirishima voice, turning to look at him. "There's more to it than that," Howland chimed in. "Powers like Todoroki's and Kanchan's work sort of the same way. It's kind of like an AP gauge in a game." "I don't get it," Kirishima told her. "Strain your muscles, and you'll tear them. Run too much, and you'll be out of breath. Quirks are still physical abilities. Even this guy's gotta have some kind of limit," Bakugo explained. "Yeah, I guess you're right. So up against in Stock Hill Man, Midoriya's trying to draw out the match." "Yeah," Howland said, finishing Kirishima's sentence. And that was exactly what Midoriya was trying to do. Not that Todoroki didn't catch on. When he did, he attacked and instantly moved to close the gap between him and Midoriya. Using his ice, he got above Midoriya, who flung himself backwards to avoid the hit, only for Todoroki to follow it up with another ice attack. With the closer ranger, Todoroki managed to snag Midoriya's foot with his ice. The resulting blast from Midoriya's bid for freedom blew Howland back in her seat. The price of that blast, though, was Midoriya's left arm, and his right hand was already all smashed up. Howland sat forward in her seat, watching intently as Todoroki went in for what he was sure was the last kill. A pleasantly surprised grin curled her lips as Midoriya blew away this new attack using an already damaged finger. Todoroki only saved himself from flying outside the ring by using his ice to brace him. Down in the ring, Todoroki couldn't understand why Midoriya would go this far, why he didn't just go down gracefully. "Why go that far?" Todoroki demanded. "You're shivering, Todoroki." Todoroki jolted when Midoriya said this. "Quirks are still just physical abilities. You must have a limit to how much of that cold you can bear. But then, you could always use your left side to thaw yourself out, right? Everyone's giving it their all. To win, to achieve their goals. To make it to the top. And you're gonna win with half your power. I still haven't put a scratch on you. Give me everything you got. Come at me. What are you planning?" Todoroki demanded. "Everything I've got. Did my bastard of a father pay you off or something? You're pissing me off." Howland winced as the two clashed again, Midoriya hitting Todoroki straight in the gut. It made her rub her own stomach in response. The hit wasn't enough to send Todoroki out of the ring, though, or keep him down. Even sitting where she was, Howland could tell that out of the two of them, Midoriya was the worst off. She doubted that even Recovery Girl could heal all of those wounds in 1 or even 2 sessions. It was reckless, but she could tell it wasn't mindless. Midoriya was anything but mindless. "Why are you going this far?" Todoroki demanded. "Just trying to meet expectations. A smiling, dependable, cool hero. That's what I want to be. That's why I'm giving it everything. For everyone. Your experiences. Your determination. I can't even begin to imagine what all that's like. But if you become number 1 without giving it your all, then I don't really think you're serious about denying him everything," Midoriya insisted. "Shut up," Todoroki growled. "That's why I have to win. I have to surpass you," Midoriya continued, the two meeting blow for blow. "I'll show my father. Your power is your own," Midoriya yelled, cutting off Todoroki. Finally, Midoriya accomplished what he had set out to do. Howland was forced to squint when Todoroki's flames roared to life. With the sight of Todoroki's flames, somewhere in the audience, his father called out to him, seemingly believing that Todoroki has accepted the fate his father had chosen for him. Howland knew differently. Todoroki wasn't even aware of his father. She could see that in the way Todoroki had zeroed in his attention on Midoriya. With both of them now fighting at their fullest, the match was about to jump to heights that neither could really handle. Summitos and Midnight jumped in, knowing it would end badly if they didn't. Still, the resulting blast was enough to make Howland curl in on herself to keep from being knocked out of her seat. When the wind died down, she straightened out, peering down at the smoke-covered ring below. What's with your class?" President Mike demanded of Aizawa. All that chilled air was heated in an instant, making it expand. Aizawa replied, "What a blast, though. And what heat. Can't see a thing. Has the match been decided?" President Mike asked. Howland stood to her feet, leaning over the wall in front of her to peer down at the ring, ignoring her friends when they told her not to lean too far out. Her tail drew still as she waited for the smoke to clear. When it finally cleared enough where she could see, her tail gave a flick at the sight of who was the only one still standing in the ring. Midoriya is out of bounds. Todoroki moves on to the 3rd round. Howland turned on her heel and took off. She ignored the calls of her friends as she hurried out of the stands and for the nurse's office. Midoriya looked like he was in bad shape and she wouldn't rest until she had checked in on him. On her way down to the nurse's office, she came across Todoroki just as he was walking past his father. The two looked up at her as she paused at the end of the hall, but after one blink, she turned on her heel and hurried along. She was pretty sure she could make her way past her next match, which would mean that, in the third round, she would face Todoroki. From the intense burning in her back that suggested he was watching her walk away, she had a feeling that Todoroki knew he would face her in the third round. She hadn't been sure before, but now she couldn't think of a better time to showcase her quirk than against Todoroki. 0-0-0-0. After a brief break in which Semitos had to completely rebuild the ring, the matches continued. Helen, after checking in on Midoriya, now stood in the ring across from Shiozaki, her tail lashing to show just how ready she was for the match to start. Instantly, just as she had done at the start of her match with Iida, Helen dropped into a crouch, hands flat on the ground, her backside rising so her tail curled over her head. A grin curled her lips as her tail lashed once and then drew still. Our two lovely ladies, one of green, the other of blue. Which will prevail? Shiozaki versus Leander. Start. The word start wasn't but half out of present Mike's mouth when Helen moved, her burst of speed taking Shiozaki by surprise. She tried to react in time, her thorns springing forth, but Helen easily twisted out of the way, coming to a sliding halt behind Shiozaki. A jab of the elbow took out Shiozaki's knees, sending her tumbling backwards. Helen caught her on her back and, with a simple flip, flipped the other girl right out of the ring. That was fast. You saw it, people. In less than a minute, Leander snagged the victory and moves on to the semifinals. Present Mike announced. Helen was quickly at Shiozaki's side then, holding out a hand to help the other girl to her feet, an apologetic smile on her face. Sorry about that. I wanted to end the match without getting ripped a new one by your thorns, Helen told her as she took hold of her hand. It's all right. We're all trying to win here, right? Shiozaki replied in understanding. Helen's tail curled happily as she smiled brightly. Despite the way Monoma treated her class, she rather liked some of the members of Class B. They had a lot of spirit and spunk, and she liked that. Helen held out her hand to Shiozaki, smiling brightly at her. Friends, then? She asked. Shiozaki looked down at Helen's hand and then back at her smiling face. It was hard to see the arrogant, high and mighty person that Monoma made the whole of Class A out to be. Helen honestly just wanted to be friends. Finally, returning Helen's smile, she took the girl's hand. Friends, she agreed. Helen's smile grew to impossible levels, her tail curling in joy. Together, the two left the ring. They chatted as they returned to the stands, Helen waving to Shiozaki as they parted ways. Helen had just taken her seat when the next match started. It was over quickly, though not as quickly as Helen's match against Shiozaki, but the next match after that lasted a little longer. Bakugo versus Kirishima. Ultimately, though, Bakugo won. With that, the final four were announced: Todoroki, Helen, Bakugo, and Takoyami. Helen, standing in her prep room, bounced from one foot to the other, shaking her hands out as she took deep breaths in and out to calm her nerves. By the time it was time for her to head to the ring, she had regained her cool. Giving herself one more shake, she headed for the ring. Our Lady of Speed and Agility and Our Lord of Firepower. Todoroki versus Leander. Todoroki stared across the ring at Helen as, with an easy smile on her face, she stretched out her shoulders. She seemed to be blissfully unaware of the situation she was in, and it made him feel bad since she was never anything but nice to him. He was intrigued, though, to see how she would handle this match. In the time since she had come to their class, he had noticed that she tended to fly below the radar, content to never really draw attention. Then, after the USJ incident, he had done some digging on her. The rumors and tales that surrounded the girl were astounding, to say the least. But it was possible that that was all they were, rumors. Not that it mattered at the moment. She, like Midoriya, was an obstacle in his way. Either way, he felt he owed her a warning, at least. You should bow out. Helen perked up, her eyes rising to meet his as she dropped her arm. For a moment, she stared into his eyes, but then she smiled, her head tilting slightly to one side as a little chuckle left her. Oh, and why is that? She asked. The answer is obvious, he replied. Is it now? Well, call me dense then. I hate to break it to you, but I'm not going anywhere. I've been looking forward to this. If anything, you should try to take this match a little bit more seriously. Or have you forgotten you don't know what my quirk is? Helen told him, all with a gentle and cheerful tone. She wasn't being arrogant, and she wasn't trying for bravado either. She was giving him an honest, straightforward warning, and he knew it. He, like everyone else in their class, like their teachers even, didn't know what her quirk was, and she never felt the need to share. In every fight, in all combat training, she had relied solely on her own wits in hand-to-hand combat. He had no idea what he was walking into, and, judging from the grin on her face, she knew it made him slightly nervous. He would have to act quickly. Match. Start. Helen's eyes widened, her gym jacket flying up as, with an upswing of his hand, Todoroki sent ice exploding upward once more, just as he had done in his match against Sero. Just like in that match, in a blink of an eye, an ice wall sprouted from the ring, rocketing upward until it stood taller than the stadium itself. Fog from the sudden change in temperature filled the ring, and where Helen had stood was all ice now. It was a little cruel, he knew, not giving her a moment to try to fight back when she had admitted herself that she had been looking forward to it, but he couldn't afford to find out, in mid-battle, what her quirk was and what it could do. How cold. Looks like it's over for Leander before it could begin, came Present Mike's voice over the speakers. Midnight, who had managed to dodge the icy attack this time, scanned the foggy smoke covering the ring, but could find no signs of Howlin. She was just about to call it when something caught Todoroki's attention. A shadow had fallen over him, growing in size. Catching on to what that meant as gasps rang out from the crowd, Todoroki threw his head back, looking upwards. His eyes widened when he came face to face with the soles of Howlin's size 8 boots. Todoroki dived to the side, hitting the ring floor and rolling away as Howlin crashed into the spot where he had just stood. She landed squarely on her feet, her tail lashing out as if to act as balance support and her knees bending. Just as quickly and easily, she sprang back from him, putting distance between the two of them. Todoroki stared at her, eyes wide in shock. There was not a single touch of frost on her or her clothes. How she had escaped his ice, he didn't know. I'm telling you, Todoroki. You're going to have to take this more seriously than you are. I've been watching everything about you since I first came to our class. You and everyone else. Not that any of you have noticed, Howlin remarked, her hands going to her hips. I don't particularly like the center stage, you know what I mean. Way too much attention to get done what I need to get done. I prefer to fly below the radar. You know, that whole out of sight, out of mind thing. Yeah, he knew what she meant. While she had an appearance that drew people's eyes, most dismissed her as a pretty face after a while. She was good with hand-to-hand combat, and when it came to grades, she excelled there too, though her math skills could use a little more tweaking. But she usually didn't do anything to draw attention and tended to fade into the background. Just like the obstacle course, Todoroki said lowly, his eyes widening. Looks like you're piecing it together. Yes, just like in the obstacle course. You and Kachan didn't even realize I was right behind you until I stepped on your shoulders. In fact, I highly doubt even those watching noticed my presence until I made myself center stage by upstaging the two of you. Howlin replied honestly, it's a little trick I've picked up over the years. Comes in handy. You see, I fly below the radar, everyone's radar, and while I don't usually go for big events like this, it's kind of a necessary evil. I'm very glad, in this case, that I was able to keep my quirk a secret up until this point. It makes for gathering my fuel so much easier. What do you mean? Todoroki asked. Howlin, in good nature, shrugged her shoulders. She didn't seem the least bit inclined to reveal anything just yet. Let me ask you this. How do you think I avoided your ice? She asked. There could have been several answers to that question. After all, she apparently had managed to avoid his ice back during the obstacle course, though he still didn't know how. She could have just dodged the ice and rode it up, or she could have used her quirk. Either way, it was a problem for him. You either dodged or you finally used your quirk. He guessed. Both, actually. You see, I decided you would be the one I finally used my quirk against. A way of showing how much I respect your strength, but also for another reason. Howlin told him. Another reason? He asked, confused. Call it kinship, if you will, because that's what I feel towards you. You and I are more alike than you know, Howlin said, smiling softly at him. He didn't understand what she could possibly mean. How in the world was the cheerful, brightly smiling Howlin anything like him? Then he remembered the Italian article he had read about the young daughter of a pair of Italy's top heroes. Perhaps, just perhaps, there were some similarities between them. If that's the case, then what is your quirk? He demanded. You really want to know? Something about the grin that sprawled across her face put Todoroki on edge. He had a feeling he was going to regret this, but he gave a curt nod in answer. Howlin's tail twitched, much like that of a cat about to pounce on its prey. Fine, then we're going to play a little game. Let's see if you'll be the first person to win, Howlin said, curling her left hand into a fist and pulling it back. I'll give you 3 chances to guess my quirk and a couple of hints to help you. Hold on tight. Here's your first hint. Howlin swung her fist as hard as she could, her fist connecting with the ring floor. The result was a reaction like if someone had placed a bomb under the ring. The ring floor broke apart, exploding up and out, sending pieces, Todoroki along with them, into the air. It was almost as if All Might or even Midoriya had used their quirk on the ring. Knelling on what remained of the ring floor, Howlin tapped her fingertips together, standing to throw her arms out wide. Here's your second hint, she called. Everything now falling through the air, froze, the chunks of the ring hanging in the sky. To Todoroki it was almost like Uraraka's quirk or maybe a time-freezing quirk. What's your first guess, Todoroki? Howlin called up to him, crouching on the spot. Of course, there was the first thought that jumped into his mind. She could either copy other quirks, like Monoma, or she had some kind of matter manipulation quirk. Either would be a good guess. He would just have to suggest both and see if either were correct. You can copy others' quirks, he called back. If possible. Her grin grew, displaying sharp made a noise like that of a game show buzzer before she launched herself into the air. The strength of her legs ricocheting her from ring chunk to chunk so quickly that all he could do to defend himself from her kick when she reached him was throw up his arms in a guard. Wrong, and not Monoma. The force of the kick sent him flying into another chunk, knocking the air from his lungs. The girl had so much strength in her legs that it was ridiculous. Any harder and he was sure she would have broken his arm. Howen landed where he had previously been perched and gave a little jump. Todoroki had to make a jump for another floating chunk when the one she had just hopped on came crashing down towards his. The two boulders collided, raining smaller pieces down on the ring below. Your next guess, please, Howen prompted, almost purring like a contented house cat. Todoroki looked up, finding her clinging to the underside of another boulder with ease. It was as if the cement was suddenly made of glue or something. Perhaps his second guess was right and she had the ability to change and manipulate matter. That would explain how she could vanish and reappear so easily during battle training. Matter manipulation, he guessed, inwardly wondering why he was playing her game to start with. Ew, that's a new one. Interesting sounding quirk, but, once again, you're wrong. Here, let me give you another hint, Howen offered. Todoroki's eyes widened and he moved quickly as she launched herself at him. Good thing he did. He was taken by surprise as an explosion went off in her hand, shattering the boulder he had been sitting on. Without a doubt in his mind, that was Bakugo's quirk, but Howen had already said that her quirk wasn't the ability to copy another quirk. That meant, Todoroki looked up at Howen as she swung herself up onto a boulder floating over his head. She was making sure to keep the high ground. His eyes watched her as she crouched there, looking down at him in anticipation. Your next guess. Careful, it's your last one, she purred. Todoroki knew his next answer wasn't a guess. He was pretty sure that it was going to be correct. He knew, now, that she had just gone from one quirk to a completely different one. She said she didn't copy quirks, and it was almost as if she already knew how to use each quirk, as if they had become a part of her, absorbed into her very system. No, he knew he would be right this time. You can steal others' quirks. Silence fell over the stadium as all eyes fixed on Howen, who silently stared at Todoroki for a moment. A heartbeat passed, then another. Then her lips slowly curled up and her tail gave a pleased flick. Well, what do you know? We have a winner.